of the wider community. The foundation will contribute $10,000 per year to create 5 awards, so $2,000 each to help offset the costs of getting to these conferences. And the conference organizers themselves, like Identiverse and the EIC and Authenticate FIDO, have all been very generous to create complimentary passes for them to attend. So we hope that other organizations will partner with us and potentially have additional recipients we can add to that first pool of 5 candidates. So those are the headlines. And I know I'm short on time already for Heather, who's coming up next. So I'm just going to put our agenda today into a little bit of context. Where you see the gray bubbles on the page are where we're going to have a quick helicopter view of standards later in this session. So we'll do about 10 minutes per standard for OpenID Connect FAPI, OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance, Moderna, and OpenID Connect for verifiable credentials. So those 5 areas are moving very swiftly. We want to make sure you had a chance to hear live today the current work on each of those. And we're also going to have 4 listening sessions in the order of the privacy paper, which is on government issued identity credentials, led by Heather first, followed by a government white paper led by Elizabeth Garber. Then we'll move into a discussion on GAIN, what's happened in the last year, which Elizabeth will also lead for us. And then we'll have Andre Pribe coming in on IoT, a brand new piece of work for the foundation. So I mentioned there are 7 white papers the foundation's been working on this past year. The first 4 have already had their first draft or a final version. So open banking and open data and the FAPI protocol went live by one of the working group co-chairs, Dave Tong, earlier this year. And that was to help government officials understand what is FAPI. How does this sit within the context of open banking and that movement, what is now commonly called data portability, and there are other beautiful names for it, but what's happening in that movement for open banking, open data? What are the standards that are out there, not just the OpenID foundations, but other options? And how do you think about the choices and making a good choice for a given market, whether you're a public sector or a private sector stakeholder? So a great piece of work's already been very fruitful to bring people along on the journey. OpenID Connect for verifiable credentials, another great lightning rod piece of work to help bring a wider set of stakeholders along on what that standard can do between what I like to think of as, well, you'll hear more later today from Christina and Torsten on that standard, so I won't go into detail. Health is a white paper where we're working towards final. Deb Bucci is here, and we continue to welcome feedback on paper and next steps. And then open banking and open data crossing borders. We won't have time to talk about this one today, but another kind of exciting area of looking at the next generation of what we can do for open banking. And then today we will go into those last 3 papers. So privacy, government, and IoT. All right, with that, we'll start with thought leadership, and the end of the day will be working group status. All right, so thank you. Handing over to Heather Flanagan. Heather is leading our work on privacy and the government-issued identity credentials.
Beauty. Yep, there we go. How many of you are going to be at IIW this week? Brilliant, because I don't have enough time to get nearly as much out of your heads as I want to in between now and the top of the hour. So I'm going to give you a sense of what I'm thinking is going into the paper, the structure that I'm looking at. And then I really want your feedback on what you think I need to be reading. I have actually a Google Doc where I'm just building my reading list to study what kind of information needs to go here and whether the structure even makes sense. So what is this paper even about? We've got a government paper going on. So what is this thing? This is government issued credentials and their derived credentials in the privacy landscape. So we're aiming to really focus down on where the policies and the protocols, where the gaps are, where they can be addressed, where more work needs to be done to make something that's globally viable. The scope will almost certainly be liberal democratic countries, because trying to make globally viable work for some regions is a bit of a harder lift than for others. So we do want to keep the scope to something that we think we can accomplish and can see change. So outlining the thoughts, what we're looking at, of course, there's going to be an introduction. That's of course there is. But there's also going to be a terminology section where I want to make sure that I've covered what what words are in here, because given the scope of people that will be reading this, you're going to have government people, policy people, protocol people. There's going to be words that they might not be familiar with. I'm not saying to invent the terms here. I really dislike reinventing terms. I will be referencing other, where these things like verifiable credentials, where are those defined? Where are credentials defined? Where are wallets defined? In some cases, they're not. Oh, look, we've identified a gap already. From there, it will be, all right, well, how do you get there from here? That's a great question, but for me, that begs, well, where is here? What does the current landscape look like? And then where is there? Where are you trying to get to? What promises have been offered by all of the digital transformation work that's happened over the last several years? Moving on from that, it's a look at the gaps and the risks, where we need to make sure that there are guardrails installed. Now, those guardrails could be, where does there need to be regulation? Where does there need to be policy? But there also may be, where is there work for the protocol developers to actually do their magic and actually make it so that the protocols might be able to better support whatever the policy and regulations are. There's also going to be a little bit of okay, well, it's not the first time we've had conversations like this. How many of you remember NSTIC? Definitely not the first time we've had these conversations. So what's changed? What's working? What didn't work, and why not? Can we learn from those rather than just, beating our head against these walls and hoping that the wall will eventually give way? After that, it's going to be, okay, well, now let's talk about scaling to the future. And that's where I'm hoping to have a little bit of roadmap guidance. What do developers and implementers need to do, to know, to think about, to actually turn these wonderful thoughts, because of course that would be wonderful thoughts, into something they can do something with. Similarly, a roadmap for the technical policy and standards authors. What guidance are we suggesting for them to take away and work on the specifications that are out there? Policymakers, there's certainly room for regulation to improve. So what exactly are we going to be offering to them going forward, and so on. So let's talk about scope a little bit more. What's in scope? Government issued credentials, and the credentials immediately derived from those government issued ones. We're not talking about third-party credentials that didn't come out of, based on government information. We're not talking about self-asserted credentials. And we're not talking, privacy is an enormous word. It means so much to so many. We're not talking about the privacy challenges beyond those that touch on the government issued and associated derived credentials. So keep the scope tight to something that we can actually write about. Without a doubt, this paper is going to beg for more papers. Some of the terms that I'm pretty sure are going to need to be defined, and you'll see a lot of ellipses, ... in these slides, because they're where I'm saying, yep, there's going to be more here. But government issued credential, exactly what are we talking about? Mobile credentials, what does that cover? Issuers, holders, verifiers, all these words, what do they actually mean? In the getting there from here, we've got the current landscape. Well, the current landscape gets to talk a little bit about what's happening in the field of biometrics with the government credentials. There's a lot of work going on around the world with that. And there's some diversity in terms of access to government source records. Some places you can get to them a lot more easily than others. There's a lot of efforts, particularly in the EU, a little bit or in state to state in the US, looking at the policy efforts of the GDPR, of the EIDAS, of the CCPA, and so on and so forth. Talk about those. And we'll also talk a little bit more about so you've got a government issued credential. Brilliant. What about the user control of their data? I actually come out of the higher education background, and one of the things that people really struggle with when they say users should should have control of their data is that not all data about the user belongs to them. If you are a citizen of a country, that's not your call. That's actually the government's call. Now, it's your call as to whether you release that, certainly, but you don't own that data. If you're a student at a university, the affiliation is owned by the university and not by the student themselves. So that kind of thing has to be considered as you're looking ahead at any of the changes that might be happening in the future. We'll talk about data minimization, of course, because that, you can't get in trouble in privacy if you don't have the data to begin with. So where that works and where it doesn't. A bit more about the relying party accountability. One of the big concerns that I've heard frequently is that the privacy isn't at the point of authentication. It's not at the point of someone logging in. It's the correlation down the road of, well, where have they logged in from? And suddenly you can start building this fingerprint of an individual, even though any one transaction might not actually hold a lot of data. Digital transformation. That phrase has been around for at least since Gandalf was a baby. But so it can mean so much. It's great. It means everything to everybody. But what I'm thinking of is, well, what were the desired outcomes? What were people even trying to do when they say they were transforming the digital world, the digital landscape? Well, actually, that comes back to, they wanted more user control of data. They wanted to focus on data minimization. They wanted some audit logs of transactions to make entities accountable for what was going on. But it doesn't always work as well as we would like. There's a lot of gaps. There's a lot of risks out there. So when I talk about wanting a section on learning from the past, I really do want some more discussion, some examples of what's worked, what hasn't worked, focusing on areas where there's just not any legal protection anyway, but there probably should be. Or where absolutely the law says that this is the way it's going to be. There's no way to enforce it, but sure, you can say it. And this is an area that hasn't been touched on probably enough, is where it's gone too far, and where that's actually resulted in some risk to human health and life. So we need to get the protections in the right place to actually make a difference. So there's going to be some highlighting as to the need for policy protections and technical protections and where they can overlap. Maybe this is where we start talking about assessment criteria. One of the other hats that I'm wearing is with the Privacy Enhanced Mobile Credentials working group in Kantara, and they're going to serve as an exemplar for some of the options in this paper that I'll be discussing. And they've got an implementer's draft being put together, an implementer's report on how would you actually create a privacy enhanced mobile credential. What would that even look like? Well, it looks like different things depending on where you stand in the ecosystem. But the point for all of that is, I want this to be a practical paper. I'm a fairly pragmatic individual. And this is where we get into what are the practical differences between what the governments are trying to achieve versus where they're actually ending up. So there's, of course, plans and roadmaps. You can write about this all day, but if you don't give people something actionable at the end of it, if you write a white paper in a forest and nobody reads it, did you actually write something? So who's going to actually benefit from having roadmaps and next steps? That's it. This to me is an open question of who do I think will really benefit and get some guidance out of here? Probably the specification and standard architects, almost certainly. Civil society, they probably, we've got EPIC involved in this. We've got some of the other privacy focused groups that need this kind of paper to stand up and say, yes, the change should happen, can happen, and here's where. Privacy sector may take this to heart as well as some guidance as to what they can do and how they can do it. And that was me zipping through to make sure that I kept to time. All of these areas absolutely need your feedback. And I think I actually have a couple minutes for any suggestions or comments, or I will certainly have some topics open at IIW this week.
Or we cold call people, Heather.
You want me to just you just yell at people and say you?
Yeah, let's you and the question.
There's over there on the last chair had a microphone.
The lovely Marie.
Hi, Mike Jones from Microsoft.
Hello, Mike Jones from Microsoft.
Hello, Heather Flanagan from Spherical Cow Consulting. I'm interested in the decision that the electronic version of my PhD diploma from Carnegie Mellon isn't in scope for the privacy write-up.
You know, that's an interesting thought, because when we say government-issued credentials, some universities are government institutions. Some aren't.
That's a private institution. It's kind of a public record, but you can imagine circumstances in which I'd like to be able to assert that on my behalf, because I did spend 7 years getting it.
I think it's a very useful and valid topic. I just think this paper has five more months to be written. So keeping the scope pretty tight is important. I do think that looking a little bit, taking that next step out, this is going to be an onion with every single layer past it. I don't think what the education sector is derived credentials, but it's related and official enough that it might need its own thing. Maybe. I see John and then Nat, or other way around.
John Wunderlich, chair of the aforementioned work group. Mike, one thing, I was teaching a course this month and I was talking to students about this, and one use case is a supply teacher or somebody coming to a school and presenting their credentials as a teacher. Not the same thing, but in the same ballpark. So that might backdoor this into scope for this effort.
Okay. So hand that to Nat, and while that's sorted out, Dick. No.
Let's use this.
There. Does that work? Okay.
It's better.
Okay. I assumed it would be handed to me to work. On the government issued, I think you really need to narrow the scope on exactly what you mean, right? A federal contractor is issued government credentials, right? There's a massive set of government credentials, and I don't think you're thinking any of those in scope. I think you're thinking of credentials issued to citizen for them to prove they're a citizen and aspects about their citizenship. Agreed? Yes? That's the scope?
That's where my head's at the moment.
Okay. But you're going to get a bunch of the scope creep unless you narrow it tighter than that. My other comment was around the definitions. I looked up I saw the definitions you had up there. And depending on what words you choose to define, frames how you think about the problem and what potential solutions are. And so I would caution against us framing what we're doing by picking certain words, right? So as an example, there was the term identity provider, which we don't really use anymore, but it could mean many, many different things. Somebody did authentication, someone that issued claims, right? Anybody that did something with identity became a fairly useless term, but it also framed sort of the relying party identity provider. And so I worry that by picking certain terms, you may frame how we're thinking about this that may not always work for what we're trying to solve.
Thank you. I'll think about that.
Okay, so I'm not Sakimura, OpenID Foundation, and not consulting, maybe. Perhaps we could be more specific on the title. The current title is very wide. That's one comment. The other comment is that when we talk about privacy, we, especially the technologists, tend to pick just one aspect of privacy, just like unlinkability on the relying party side or something like that. That's very specific, very small part of privacy. And when we talk about privacy, it's probably a good idea to actually adopt internationally accepted frameworks like OECD privacy principles or ISO privacy principles or privacy framework, and discuss in that framework so that we are not just cherry picking the bits and pieces of the privacy aspect that we like.
Good thoughts. Thank you. All right. And with that, I think I'm going to hand straight over to...
You want to talk briefly about next steps, how to reach out to you, get involved, contribute?
Okay. Yes. Next steps are very important because I'm going to be working on this pretty much full tilt for the next few months. Again, if you're at IIW, come talk to me there because I'll want to hear from you. If you want to talk to me offline, you can reach out to me via email, and the email is long, so you may want to ping Gail or Mike to make sure you get it.
Director@oidf.org. Director@oidf.org is a good.
That one works. Director@oidf.org. And there will be more listening sessions, certainly, especially as I find people who are passionate about the topic and want to help dive in on it.
Right. So definitely the follow-up sessions this week at IIW. Right, Heather? Probably.
Yes.
And for those that are here. And of course, our thanks to 4 or 5 organizations. Some of them are already here today. So thank you to Kantara and to AMBA, who've joined today's session and will be here this week. So good to have them on board. And you also mentioned EPIC and BI, Better Identity Coalition and OIX are chipping in too. So please, if you want to personally be involved, we warmly welcome your contributions. We really need, as Nat and John Bradley and I were saying last night, the peer review of this work to make sure it reaches a really high intellectual bar, and that it serves a purpose, that it's not the white paper, if it's not read, does it have an end goal, that it really does move the needle, because it does seem like we're hitting this really vital moment. And we hope that this is useful work and, is work that should be referenced by OECD and ISO and others in helping to move the conversation forward. So thank you for your leadership, Heather. Appreciate it. Yeah. So next, Elizabeth Garber is going to take us through a listening session and a discussion on the government white paper. Yes. Citizen-centric identity systems. Good, I can read a page. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Is this working? Yeah, okay, good. So yesterday I chose to spend the day supporting my stepmother who's involved in an internationally competitive barber shop, which means that I just stepped off the plane and my ears haven't quite popped yet. So I hope you'll be patient with me, especially during the Q&A. But I'm really, really excited to be here to talk to you about this paper, because when I look around this room, there is just tremendous intellectual capital and the right experts in the room to be advising me on what directions we should be taking with this paper, which is in really nation stages, right? So we're looking to explore the digital identity problem space and solution space from the perspective of government stakeholders to really help them to navigate what is out there today in terms of digital identity solutions and problems, take them through sort of the current changes and emergent trends, and then recommend some ways of approaching it. This is really about starting a conversation and building upon the knowledge base that's out there, and engaging with these stakeholders in a productive way. And when I look out here, I know that you guys are going to have tremendous inputs and advice for me in terms of what we include in the paper. So what I'd like to do, actually, before I get to that slide, what I'd like to do is just chat to you a little bit about kind of the underpinnings of the paper, the assumptions that we're making about the roles and goals of government, what identity is to them. It's really basic stuff. And then just put some questions out there to you. Like I said, this paper is in really nation stages. We have a bit of an outline, but it's at a really high level at the moment. So we are starting from a position that the government is here to ensure the well-being of citizens. So obviously that's not always true, but we would like to be assuming that it is for the purposes of this paper, while allowing for the possibility that in future it isn't. And so we want the well-being of citizens, sustainable growth and resilience to be at the heart of this paper, the main goals of government that we're seeking to address through the problem spaces we explore and the solutions we recommend. And when we talk about resilience, we're not just talking about the resilience of the technology. We're really talking about social resilience. So, what is the resilience against cybercrime? The resilience against if we're talking about economic growth, we need to be thinking about business resilience against misinformation online that affects small businesses, resilience against fraud. All of this ties into economic, political, human resilience. So that's going to be a key theme, but by no means the only thing. We're talking about well-being, growth, and resilience. When it comes to identity, we are assuming that much as Heather spoke to, we have different aspects to our identities. We have rights over how and where we assert them. And while identity data is personal and in many ways ours, as Heather referred to in her talk earlier, other organizations do have some limited rights over that data. And the best model we have out there is GDPR. So the paper is going to be very aligned to the rights and assertions in GDPR over the extent to which individuals own and control their data. At least at the moment, that's what we're thinking. When it comes to government, we want to be fully cognizant and we want to be interviewing stakeholders in such a way that it reflects our cognizance of the fact that the government has many layers and many roles in the digital ID space, right? So you have the federal government in many countries, and then you have different jurisdictions at different layers, and then you have different functions within government. Then in many different cases, those functions or those layers are going to be acting as an issuer of identity information, interested in binding an individual to some kind of identifier, needing to be able to recognize them when they return, and maybe even doing that on behalf of others. In other cases, the government is going to be someone who's consuming that information, who needs to, is the customer from another part of government. And then in other contexts, they are regulating it. So we want to be able to speak across and up and down these different layers of government needs. And we're looking for stakeholders to interview and discuss our paper with. So if you are one of them, please speak to me. Or if you have insights into these different layers and functions and roles and goals of government, please do reach out. I would love to talk to you. And when we talk about standards, not just OpenID standards, by the way, but when we talk about standards, we're talking about them as offering tools to government officials, and they work together as part of any user journey. So this is going to be part of the solution space, but we want to make sure that we're addressing the role of standards in this paper. I'm going to skip over this for now because I would like to have more time in the discussion and your feedback about the sort of the path that we're going down in this paper, and any recommendations you have for reading material, interviewees, topics that we need to dive into, or themes that we need to address. So I'm going to leave this up here, and I'm going to stop talking and leave some silence for you to fill.
I'll just offer a resource. I wrote a paper last year and presented it at Identiverse called Seeing Self-Sovereign Identity in Historical Context, that looks at the shape of paper-based identity systems that have evolved over 1,000 years relative to computer-based identity systems, and then relative to SSI architectures. And I think there's a key insight there about how paper-based systems have a certain structure, and then we've tried to do identity in these default digital structures that have come down by accident to us, and that if we keep trying to jam identity into those structures, it's not going to work because it hasn't been working. So SSI is kind of a way through the wormhole to get back to paper-based architectures.
Awesome. Thank you. I would love to connect. Also, I saw that you had done a talk at Whitehall a few months ago, and I saw a really neat infographic, and I think I +1 to desire to see it. So I'd love to chat to you afterwards.
Hi, John Wunderlich, Cantera. Two things your talk sparked in my head. One, kind of playing off what Dick said. I've made a lot of money as a consultant off the GDPR, but one of the things about the GDPR is that they talk about data subjects. And the last keynote I did in the before times, was that from data subjects to data citizens, because built right into the structure of the idea of a data subject is you lose all your autonomy. You are subject to the data controller. And I'm not sure that that's the framing that we want to carry forward. So I would just put that forward. And the other thing on the
really into that comment, thank you.
And the other thing in the role of government, and what makes government so much harder than private sector, is we can't fire the citizens. We have to consider all the edge cases, which makes everything more expensive, more difficult, and harder to implement, and creates risk on the edges. So, for what that's worth.
Thank you. Look, lots of hands. Okay. Okay, we're like transcribing this, right? Because I'm not writing notes.
I'm not sure whether we're recording it, so we'll check on that. But we are recording. We are recording.
Thank you.
Okay, this is Joachim Lokam from Eurocom, and I was just wondering if you're aware of all the work that has been going on in Europe. So there has been actually a bunch of papers worked on by the community, and the first one was issued back in 2017 by the German Bundesblock, and further papers have been basically providing groundwork of the community to the European Commission. And we see now the momentum in Europe is basically based on these papers. So I just want to make sure that or understand your approach of building on this momentum and preventing, the situation where controversial statements will be made, because this will be really not very helpful for the community. And so I think it would be great to have some sort of consensus mechanism in place where you invite different organizations and make sure also to see what the decisions that in the political landscape were made already will be not disrupted, so to say, right? So because that could be, if there's too much controversy created by new papers, then we might have discussions that stop the momentum, basically.
Okay, definitely don't want to stop any momentum. I love momentum. I think, so I would never, I'm aware of a lot of work in Europe. I have a lot of papers produced by people in Europe, but I would never claim to be aware of all the work in Europe. And I would love to chat to you about what work in particular you think I need to be most conscious of, and which people in particular I need to be speaking to. And I'm saying I, and that's like a royal I. It implies a we. So let's definitely connect afterwards. And also about which controversial topics you see maybe us potentially wading into. So thank you.
So maybe extending the data subject versus data controller. And going back to your list, I did not see auditing or accountability. I saw security, but there's really a difference, especially with concerning about where data is being moved and where that information. I think that really is an important piece that needs to be added.
Yeah. I'm not sure which list you're referring.
I was looking at the different roles and what their responsibilities.
Yes. Okay.
So where is the accountability and where is the auditing? That's my question.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. We'll add that. Is someone monitoring online to see if there are questions coming in?
while we check on that, I think just a little bit of context between these two papers, what you heard Heather talking about and what you're hearing Elizabeth speak to now is the government paper is intended to be like higher level, overarching, what a government official might need to know, assuming it's kind of speaking to potentially the CISOs who might have technical expertise but not identity related expertise, or might not be on top of all of the moving pieces, like Kalia mentioned, formative work on self-sovereign identity relative to government-issued identity credentials, ISO 18013-5, relative to VCs, like there's just a lot. Like my perception is that no one person is really completely on top of all of the moving trends. So how could you expect the thought leaders responsible for making informed decisions that they really understand it at all as well, right? So how do we try and pull out those key themes, put it into an accessible paper that's legible and open to consumption, and that is referencing other great work that's come before it, right? So how is it serving at this particular point to pull together that thinking and then to drive the wider conversation forward? So if we have recommendations as a community to specific government types of officials or to other organizations like the OECD or the UN or others, like what are we trying to say? So using this paper as a vehicle to synthesize that and make concise recommendations. Very ambitious, but at a minimum worth trying. I think that's where the board came out and why we wanted to pursue this effort. The privacy paper is kind of like a deeper dive into one specific niche. If you have a government issued identity credential, how do you think about the privacy implications of using that credential? So it's a particular dive down deep. Similarly, we'll hear in a minute from Andre around IoT. That's kind of like another narrow dive down into the IoT dimensions of identity. So if you have drones, how do you have the control of the drone, right? So there's certain areas where government is already thinking about identity related to IoT. And then of course, Deb, who raised a question earlier, is thinking about health. All of those questions around health and identity. So we talked about the 7 papers, but they're all connected. So the lead editors are themselves also talking to each other about how the papers come in sync. But we know we're not the first movers on this thinking. We really want to make sure we're referencing all of the wider body of work that's going on around the world, because we see snippets of it. But how do you pull that into something that's timely and meaningful for this moment, for the next 6 months, and come up with something that is substantive, come in March, April timeframe. Other questions for Elizabeth and Mark? Her partner in crime is Mark Hain, who's in Europe, so not here with us today.
No, not here.
If there's no more questions online, then maybe we'll jump into your next session.
I don't think I'm next on the agenda.
Oh, then maybe it's
IoT.
Andre is next up. Okay, so let's go forward one slide and hand over to Andre. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. You can hand it. Right, so my pleasure to introduce Andre Privé, who's the CTO and works with IC Consult, who's been rapidly expanding and acquiring new profile around the world. So great to have you flying in from Germany to join us today, Andre. And I just as a little bit of personal background, I saw Andre speaking at EIC earlier this year and talking about IoT and the use of OpenID Connect and like trying to solve specific problems within the automotive industry, for example. And I said, Andre, I think you might be the person that the board's looking for to lead this identity work. And he had a chance to get to know the board and look at the scope. And he agreed to step up and be the lead editor for this paper. We are conscious as a community. We don't have a lot of people that think about IoT and identity. So we're trying to use this conversation, actively reaching out to IoT standards bodies to try and like chip away at what is this intersection between IoT standards, for which there's been clearly a painful adoption arc they've had to try and even develop standards. But what can be done to look at that intersection between people, human carbon people, and the devices that they want to influence. So Andre, thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, today I want to give you a brief overview of the white paper we recently started officially. What it's about, as Gail said, bringing together digital identities of human beings and devices. First of all, to put it a little bit into the context, it's on the area of new opportunities for the OpenID Foundation, so the upcoming things for the future. Before talking about what we are doing there, I would like to share with you the why. why we are doing that. So the problem statement, what is the foundation of that paper? So Internet of Things, I think it's a very broad area. So for that paper, it is everything what is connected, but beyond smartphones, servers, notebooks, and so on, and in some way constrained. So we have to have in mind that it does not have the same capabilities, for instance, to interact with human beings, or maybe limited from a CPU power perspective, connectivity perspective, and so on. Then the challenge we see in our daily business as a system integrator, when it is about connecting devices and bringing that somehow together with identities, first of all, the identity guys are typically involved at a very late stage. Yeah? Why is that the case? Well, there are departments in charge of building the product, yeah? And then as a next step, adding somehow digital services on top of that. And then in the next iteration, oh, okay, we need to have a username. Let's build a login page. Oh no, there's already something. And then, well, it's at a later stage. What we really see is that it is not easy to understand what of the amount of protocols, standards, organizations out there have relevance for a specific use case. Yeah? And therefore, companies develop proprietary approaches with the result of having, well, not the best visibility, higher costs, privacy and security concerns, and the integration is really hard work. The second reason why we really have to take care of that topic, if we look to products or innovation of products out there, a lot of innovations are happening around connectivity, yeah? And digital services on top of the physical product. And we are today just at the beginning. A couple of companies having something in place, but often, well, only used by early adopters. So we are at the starting point, and we now have to build the kind of foundation to make that kind of innovation successful for the future. So why? Now let's have a look where we are right now. So even if the discussions are now nearly 6 months ago that we started, we should do something there. We kicked it officially off in November. Right now, are in the process of having interviews with industry experts, thought leaders, figuring out what is out there. Therefore, I'm highly interested, of course, in getting a little bit of hints where to look at, advice, hear from the audience and the audience online, that we can then have in January first draft to share, getting feedback from the audience here, but of course also stakeholders, stakeholders, governmental officials, and so on, so that we can finalize it somehow in April. Okay, now let's come to the more interesting part. The ecosystem. So I think it became also in the sessions before a little bit clear that there is a lot of things out there. And when it's about identity and devices, I'm right now in the process of collecting and developing an understanding how important is that standards, that protocol, that organization for bringing IoT and identities together. Yeah? Therefore, we have here a diagram with 2 dimensions. One is the identity dimension, with 4 levels. Yeah? Just not taking care. Yeah, taking care, but more just on a device level, not on a user level. Taking care on a user level, mainly for authentication, or having really identity focus, so additional metadata, data about identity assurance, trust, and so on. So more than just the authentication. And the other dimension is how much is that standard, the protocol, focused on devices, on IoT as defined before. I would like to mention some of them which are important. That list is, by the way, by far not complete yet. There's a couple of other things to add here, like humor, for instance, might play somehow a role, and some more. But have a look to the ones which are already there. There are protocols which are very important in the area of IoT, like MQTT, a publish-subscribe protocol for devices, which are too constrained or for performance reason are preferring faster protocols with less overheads than HTTP. And it's used quite often, but not really taking care of about end user identities. Or the Web of Things API, for instance. Let's look to the identity side. There we have, of course, OpenID, and here we are not just here talking about OpenID with a couple of working groups providing value somehow to identities. But when it's about devices in terms as defined before, then we end typically on a kind of application level. We have a client ID which belongs to an application. We're not going further than that. We have other standards like SCIM, which is also focusing a lot on identities, but not really on devices. We have OAuth, and then we are not just then having it rated as high on the device level is especially the case because of the OAuth device grant. I think there are at least two persons here in the audience which will be very familiar with that, which is, I would say, doing the most so far, bringing identity and devices and identities together. And but we'll later talk a little bit about why are there still gaps and still need to talk about that. I think at the end of the day, we should come up with a plan solving the gap in the top right corner.
So Andre, if I can interrupt for a second, I'd love to hear from the group online and in person whether the structure you set up resonates, whether that seems like a good way to look at the two spheres and the open problem. Maybe show it as a show of hands, perhaps, is less. So let's see. Put up your hand if you think that makes no sense whatsoever. You do it differently. All right. How about show of hands of, okay, that seems credible. Let's run with that and see if it holds up as we continue the conversation. Any signs where that seems to make some sense? Okay. Some nodding. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. So, we have a comment or question?
I think there's two aspects to identity in this context, right? There's the identity of the device and how that, and it's a little bit unclear to me where that fits into this flavor and how what the expectations are, either to leverage existing work or something else that represents the device issuing effectively its own identity and how that gets managed versus the connection of a human or a person to the identity. And when we think about OpenID and SCIM, right, we're talking more about the human to device connection or just human connection. So I think some clarity around that would be useful in this space, in the sense of what we're trying to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, it's my way how to try to get a little bit the overview and understanding what are areas in which it is required to spend more time, as they are very likely to contribute to that challenge, and which are a little bit far away and might therefore does not have that impact or are not part of an approach bringing that together. I'm very sure that for the paper overall, the category will change, and of course there will be an exact definition what is in which level and for which reasons. So therefore, I think there are a lot of points where we can discuss whether something is a little bit more left, right, up, down.
Hi. So in the upper right-hand corner, that's complexity. Complexity is bad. I actually try and stay away from that corner as much as possible. But what I'm thinking is that IoT devices are coupled to a person, in the case of my smartwatch or smart ring, or to a place, in the case of my thermostat, so that's a second order connection to people, or to something else. So the what the identity is coupled to is kind of a core question for me in this, and figuring out what category of problem you're addressing.
Mm-hmm. Let's maybe discuss about that point a little bit later. I would share some other thought before coming to that, because depending on the use case, depending on the industry, there will be likely complete different kind of entity relationship models. But it might be that there is, on a very abstract level, the similarity over all of them, in which specification or a guideline can provide guidance to people in charge building these kind of solutions. And well, in that case, there has to be, of course, always room to make enhancements, to adapt it perfectly to the particular use case. But I think there are the kind of similarity in which we can provide some foundation. That is at least today my gut feeling. I think we have another question or comment.
Yeah, quick. So the two last comments, I think I will define them as the relationship between either device and a human, or relationship between two devices. So you can, the example was the thermostat, that you may have one-to-many relationship. So a thermostat has relationship with multiple individuals. A car could have a similar relationship to a number of individuals. So the concept of a user, I think that's, it may or may not apply to a thing. And so a thing may have a relationship with other things, whether it's sensors, whether it's drones. And so the purpose of identifying or being identifiable is specific to the use case, and it may be a human or it may be another thing, depending on what the use case is.
Yeah, but I think on a high level, there are not so many different use cases. But let's come to that. Let's come to that point in five minutes. I promise.
It was a similar comment to what Bjorn was going to make. I just wanted to say, I understand what you're saying, but like coming from General Electric, we absolutely had devices that were not in communication with humans, weren't owned by humans, human was not the primary source. So, and it is incredibly complex, and there's no good solution for it right now. But that question mark represents a huge opportunity for people who are in that industry.
Yeah, exactly. I would. So my impression is that it is purely about machine to machine, about devices which do not have any interaction or any connection to a human identity, directly or indirectly via an organization. In that case, I would see them out of scope. For that paper, as soon as we are having somehow connections, not from a, maybe indirectly for an organization which is in charge of the maintenance, these kind of things, then it might be interesting to figure out if we can provide something to make these kind of implementations easier, more straightforward. more similar. So we will talk about scoping in a second.
So we have a question from online. Marie?
Yes, question from Bryce Watkins. Feels like a piece might be missing in that most devices have a management infrastructure behind them, and the management infrastructure should be included as the end user person for the device as a delegation from the management infrastructure, or vice versa.
Yeah, I think the category, one example of these kind of categories would be IoT platforms, yeah, and they will be added here as well. That's clear. FIDO is providing something what is helping for that kind of use cases, bringing devices to an IoT platform, which is a FIDO device onboard specification, so not to be mixed up with FIDO 2, passkey, these kind of things. Yeah, but it is not really related to an user, just very indirectly by having a kind of voucher which can be used to enroll a device to an IoT platform. So there are a couple of tools and approaches out there which deliver something a little bit. Before we talk about a little bit more about the use case, and I think that's something where there's a lot of interest. I would talk a little bit about the scoping. Oh, okay. No, one question.
Jim Wan from JP Morgan Chase. It looked like when you mentioned user authentication, there might be another column called user authorization that's not probably parallel to the user authentication.
Yeah.
And you can put OAuth in that column, not necessarily authentication.
User authentication is likely not the best term for the category. I would like to have different levels on how much identity is provided by that standard. How much do we have here? And I just want to make sure that we kind of differentiate if it's just the authentication piece or just the authorization piece, or if it's a more holistic approach. But I agree, authorization is a very important area, and we'll mention it later in the use case section as well. Okay, then let's have a look to the scope. Figuring out what is the right scope for that paper. From a device perspective, all devices which are somehow constrained, so not smartphones, servers, notebooks, and so on, connected to the internet or private networks, are therefore somehow in scope. Not in scope are very industry-specific approaches. For instance, KNX from the automotive, or KNX when it's about home automation, these kind of things, as it would really be too broad for such a paper. Especially at the beginning, we had a couple of discussions when it's about trust between different components used to build a device. And but here's also my gut feeling that would be too much. Focusing on the silicon itself, it's more about, well, everything more fine-grained in the MAC address is likely too fine-grained for such a paper. From organization's perspective, okay, every organization which is somehow contributing into the two segments we have seen before should at least be mentioned in figuring out if they have relevance for us. And then in points of use cases, there are a lot of industry-specific use cases, but also a lot of general use cases which seems to be similar between different industry sectors. And I think these are the ones we should focus on. That should be, from my perspective, the scope for that paper. But I would also be interested if this is what you would expect from a paper talking about IoT and identities. Agree? Yeah, okay. All right, then let's have a look to some of the use cases. By far not complete, just to give some ideas. So one category would be likely the more administrative side of things. And the other that's what's happening at runtime when the device is really in use, is enrolled, and so on. There are, of course, a couple of things like which are related to the management of the device and the relationship to the persons. Yeah. The process of claiming ownership of a device, delegating somehow access, responsibility to organizations, to users. The consent seems to be a very important topic, not just in points of privacy, but also for this kind of OAuth scope related to consent. Yeah? I allow the device to act on my behalf for something specific. Yeah? Allowing the Amazon Alexa to precondition my car would be one example of that. And also the trust, of course. At runtime, we have access to a device, giving a device access to the outside part of the ecosystem, authorization, authentication, and so on, understanding what sessions are out there, getting insights into the capabilities of a device when it is about identities, these kind of things. But there are a couple of more, and then there's really the questions: what are the ones which are abstract and relevant to many many industries, different kind of solutions. All right, then let's have a look to a very, very abstract, very, very simple entity relationship model here. Yeah, just to give one hint when referencing to the OAuth device grant, why there's to be something in addition to that. So we have the user, the owner of the device. Yeah. Very often we see use cases of delegating access to further users, but somehow limited. Yeah. He's not complete owner, the administrator of the device, but is just having a subset of functions. And of course, it's not always a direct relationship to a user, but sometimes indirect via an organization. Then we have a second kind of relationship to that device, which is somehow born in the supply chain. The manufacturer of the device, or one later step, who is in charge of operating it, has maybe liability. That might be directly from the very beginning of the life cycle of the device, or might come up later in industrial use cases, B2B use cases, but also in consumer use cases. Yeah. That's my partner of choice to maintain the dishwasher. Yeah. So these kind of scenarios in which other organizations get upfront predictive maintenance information, for instance. Okay.
A quick question for me, Andre. Yeah. So in that scenario on the user, would you have a situation where the user can be, I, a car owner, have my Tesla and I'm authorizing it to do something, right? The identity relationship of me to my Tesla, versus a car sharing service. And the car sharing service could be the organization that's authorizing somebody to get access to it. Is it both of those in that bottom left-hand corner?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. In that case, they're more on the kind of user side. Yeah, more entities. That would be one of these examples, for instance. Yeah. But there's so many more, I would say, but anyhow, it's of course it will not be possible to cover all of them, but really getting an understanding from a very abstract level, what are the similarities in which it makes sense to provide something, yeah, and what will always be up to the implementer to figuring and designing the data model precisely to the use case. Yeah. I really liked Dick's comment about identity provider. Yeah? In one of the sessions before, saying, okay, it's not very clear, everything's identity provider and so on. yeah, in that case, it's absolutely not clear. But what becomes somehow obvious, it's required to have something in place to bringing these different entities together at different points in time, and also having in mind, and that's the kind of additional thing compared to what we have, for instance, in the OS device grant, also the notion of application, service, the backend system, the digital representation of the device in the world, because that's what we see in the kind of real life use cases, that we are very good in onboarding applications to identity management systems, because it's our daily business. And now there are a couple of devices behind that service which might act directly or indirectly with users. And there's a comment.
So what's the difference between a user as an organization and a maintainer organization?
It's more the birth of this relationship. That's more something what is typically coming out of the supply chain. That's something what is later by owning it, operating it, buying it. So that's a kind of difference. If at a later stage we see that it might be the same, just depending on access rights, okay, that's fine. So then my gut feeling is we will have kind of difference based on that kind of onboarding in a couple of situations.
I would probably draw the picture differently, that you either have the device in the middle and you have the different stakeholders around it, or the stakeholder listed below in one box, because a user can be an application depending on your use case.
Yeah.
And what's the difference between an organization that uses or owns the device versus maintain it? I don't see the difference. I could see that an organization is a stakeholder and they can have different roles, but I don't see them to be, to me, this is confusing. Again, I would put the device in the middle and then associate with the different types of stakeholders that may play different roles. You're mixing and matching roles and stakeholders, in my opinion, in this picture.
Thanks for the comments. It's likely make sense. Yeah. So just one additional thing I want to add here. What comes also in this responsibility of the identity providers, somehow bringing that device, like today identities, makes them able to interact with foreign services as well. So like we have that in a couple of federation use cases. So having the time in mind, I want to at least share one slide with you. It's a kind of little bit input I got from discussions with industry experts having these kind of IoT identity use cases. And some I want to bring up is what we need is kind of OAuth 2.0 for native apps, which gives a recommendation how to deal with native apps, but for IoT. So that's kind of wishes from these users, or well, for some companies, device authorization right is exactly what they need. But in addition to that, first of all, identity data as well, and the metadata about the authentication, and more important, the possibility to have concrete certifications and tests on that to have interoperability between different players in the kind of ecosystem. Demand for a standardized approach to managing relationships between users, organizations, and devices in a scheme style. That was brought up, standardized endpoints, and as mentioned before, kind of additional entity to what we are today working with in OpenID Connect and OAuth on top of the client relying party, and the OpenID provider authorization server as a subject, which is really helping to allow to having application services on one side and types of devices and concrete devices on the other side as well. Okay. Based on what you heard so far, even having in mind we are in a very, very early stage, I would be happy to hear more thoughts on that. Okay, couple of hands.
Hi. Is this working? Vittorio from Okta. Thanks for the presentation, very interesting. I have two meta comments. One is that although from Heather, I heard very clearly why we want to bring that paper in existence. I didn't, like, might be my fault, I might have spaced out, but I didn't get the same declaration of intent from you. Mm-hmm. And that made it super hard for me to understand whether the things that you are describing help or not, or how to cut it in one way or the other. Yeah. So one suggestion would be, if you formalize it, that would be super helpful.
Of course, it was a short version of the problem statement I had before. It's a little bit more content there yet, but I completely agree that it's something we have to work on. Yeah.
Thank you. The other is that here I'm going to place my program manager hat in my former life. My feeling with your heat map of the various standards and even the questions here, I feel that you might have led the witness a bit. Let's say that if you look at the IoT world, some people use standards, but a lot of people don't. And so my instinct would be to start with the use cases, as in today people do IoT, what do they do? Why aren't they using the standards? Like when people come to me, and want like customers and they want IoT solutions, they very rarely have a doubt about what protocol to use to communicate. The problems are others, as in like so many different apps, and the only thing I can do is a client credential flow, but your stuff is not structured to have millions of confidential clients. So I would start more from the what's happening in the world already and see what are the shortcomings that I think we have. Because if you ask them about the protocols, you might be asking, do you want mint or chocolate cookies? But people eat sandwiches. So
even if I decided for that approach here in the presentation, is, of course, for the work is having the interviews with the industry experts, having these use cases, sharing.
I don't think I had a chance to speak to that. Like, which are where did the interviews come from so far? What are the leading use cases, to Vittorio's point? Because I think that was just didn't come across in the slides today.
But maybe one point is, so of course I'm very interested in which protocols are they using right now, and also which protocols not, even if they would be somehow in the ballpark of that use case, right? That's the reason, because often the answer is, oh, what's that? I never heard about FIDO device onboard specification, for instance, right? And that's important to understand. Is this because it's not fitting, or because there's just so many things outside and they're just not aware of that, right? That's the reason why I also decided working on that other side to have that kind of double check, if it's more knowledge related or if it's just not fitting.
We had a comment online from Bryce Watkins. I think the entity relationship models need to be expanded. I work in the health sector, and we will issue identities to both health service consumers and health service providers. Thirdly, there will be identities issued to the technology vendors who will operate devices on behalf of health providers to collect data from the consumers. The data will then be delivered to applications provided by other technology vendors, potentially different to the technology vendor who's operating the devices.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. My expectation is that for every real-world use case, of course, there will be enhancements. But I would love to follow up on that and getting that input from the health sector.
I'm just wondering if one of the bullets that didn't make the slide was UMA, I haven't been active in UMA for a number of years, but I know that when it was being written, one of the use cases that Eve always used to joke about was the connected socks, or the one that I think of in this case is a smart bathroom scale that reads fat, all these other kinds of things, and is a connected service. UMA seems to be something that should be on that list.
I think I mentioned it, but it's not there yet for timing reasons. There are a couple of other protocols also missing, like for instance the constraint application protocol and others, which might be very close related to the things we were talking about. It's just not complete here, and UMA will be there for sure. Thank you. Anything else? So as we are now a little bit over time, happy to get feedback, questions, comments, inputs, use cases later. Yeah. So feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
And just to note, Andre will be at IIW the next couple of days as well.
I will.
Yep.
Yeah, before you run away, Andre, I was riffing with Andre offline, and maybe it's because I'm an ex-Apple person, so I still kind of sometimes see the world through how Apple looks at it, with a full stack of high level of security, high level of privacy, because everything is integrated into one happy Apple ecosystem. Well, then what do you do when you're a user of a different product from a different ecosystem? How are you achieving something similar in terms of the confidence, but with more open interoperability between it, right? You've got a Google user who wants to use the Apple device. You have the Apple device user who wants to use an Android device. They're obviously working together and thinking about the standards in the IoT community and those standards bodies. But then how, again, is that made more open? How are different kinds of wallets, or how are they interoperating with it? So it just seems to me that there's a big gap, and we're just trying to open that dialogue starting today and getting your feedback on it. So a lot of great comments already from the group. And I hope you'll actively reach out to Andre to get involved and help us chip away at how we structure the problem, to be accurate, to have the right spheres on the page. I think, Vittorio, I agree with you. My Apple hat would say start use case first. What are the specific use cases? But I'd like to give one of my favorites, which is my grandmother had a pacemaker placed. I don't know if many of you are familiar with this, right? But to have something like a pacemaker put inside of somebody's body, like, well, what's the degree to which the human being whose body that's in should have control over their device? What's the degree to which their doctor or the staff of that doctor's office or the manufacturer of that device or the applications that are talking to it or how it harmonizes with something else that's in the body? There are so many things. And then there's also the attack vectors. Would it be a good thing for an adversary to be able to turn off all the pacemakers made by a certain manufacturer or to accelerate them and kill people? It's truly terrifying, right? And the same is true for car sharing. You work with a lot of automotive providers. Like, can cars be intercepted and the security end-to-end in that domain be compromised? It's kind of terrifying. It feels inevitable that that's going to come about unless we solve these problems. So can we get ahead of them as a community, lean into our IoT friends and work on solving them together? Many of you are part of large organizations who will have, peers that are working on those problems on the devices. We'd like to try and get closer and bring together the IoT and the identity communities to solve this. On Thursday, I'll have lunch with the chap who leads the Connectivity Standards Alliance, which is one of the more credible players in the space. And it's helpful to get your input and to enter into a really constructive conversation with that community. So please help us do that. And thank you, Andre, for your leadership in getting that work done.
Thank you very much.
So our next session, do we have our break or we go straight to the next one?
Oh, we have a break. If we can keep it to 5 minutes to get back on schedule, that would be great. So see you back at 2:00.
All right. Thank you.
If we can, please take your seats. We'll get started again.
Tell Torsten to report to here.
Torsten, you're needed up front.
I think it's funny that ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, please grab your seats. No more chatting. Chatting comes later. Sit down. Thank you.
Thank you, Kylie. That was fantastic. Okay, y'all, we're going to get started.
Thank you.
Okay, I need to turn on. I just had to on doing that since I.
Can we? Oh.
Oh, you want?
We can pass back and forth if we need to. For
We do. So if you don't mind, since you're going to be close to two things. If you can, when you're speaking, at least be somewhat near the podium. And since you're both going to be up there, keep yours off while she's speaking, and vice versa, because it'll start to echo really bad with two of them.
All right, everyone, if you can come on, sit back down. As usual, foundation members being troublemakers and not, no, just kidding, having a great deal of fun. So happy to introduce our next two speakers, Elizabeth Garber and Torsten Waterstedt, Dr. Torsten Waterstedt, excuse me, who are together going to talk about where we are with the work of the Global Assured Identity Network, which is now 1 year on. And there's been some work that's been hosted by the OpenID Foundation, some parallel work hosted by the Open Identity Exchange. They'll talk about how that work's progressing, the traction, and the road ahead. So thank you, Elizabeth and Torsten. And to all of the bad kids in the corner, you can take your conversation outside or you can sit down. Thank you.
Thanks, Gail. We'll give the kids in the corner a moment. And while we're doing that, I'll just say I am so sorry, Torsten, that your name is not on this slide. Please know that it is because you need no introduction in this room.
Torsten,
I'm undercover today.
you can keep your mic on, Torsten.
Undercover. Okay. So we're going to do a quick review of the Global Assured Identity Network, which was a white paper written just over a year ago. We'll do a bit of a tour of what that was all about for anyone who hasn't come across it yet, which I don't know how many people in the room have never come across it. Can you raise your hand if you're a person who's never, ever come across it? Okay, all right. So we have some. So we will do the tour of what it was all about, and then a bit of an update on what has happened since the paper was written, since the last IIW event. And please know that, as always, when we're talking about GAIN and really all of these presentations, it's an invitation to get involved. So GAIN, the Global Assured Identity Network, emerged from something that everyone here knows and I think agrees upon, which is that, in the beginning there was trust on the internet. In the beginning there were trusted spaces, closed areas in which everyone knew who everyone else was on the internet, academic purposes, military purposes, government purposes. But that ability to know who your counterparties were online, that trust was lost as the internet opened up to more commercial, social, and other purposes. Full credit to Nat for this slide. It's a complete derivative version. Thank you, Nat. So that has led, this is still the paradigm that we have today, and that has led to things like weaponized anonymity for some. And I think that that is becoming even more topical as we watch some of the current events going on right now, live at Twitter, for example. It also leads to financial crime, people taking advantage of those anonymous spaces and misinformation generally. While at the same time, bad actors, at the same time as bad actors are able to weaponize anonymity, we have lack of control over our own data for the rest of us. So we experience pervasive tracking, identity theft, and other problems. GAIN is a shared vision about a way to solve that. And that is, we have these trusted spaces. We have these ecosystems where counterparties can trust one another, and we would like to bridge those islands of trust. We would like to create a interoperability across those islands, however they are built. And that became the crux of our white paper that was published last September. It was a collaborative effort with no logo. It was pro bono, and an open source piece of work with 155 people, many of whom are in the room today. Raise your hand if you were a co-author of the GAIN paper. Yes, thank you. I'll raise my hand too as co-editor. But the world has moved on a lot in the, 16 months since we wrote that paper. That said, some of our principles are still underpinning the work that we're doing today. So we have, a big vision for what we want to do. We want to achieve global interoperability, and we're thinking internet scale for the work that we're doing. But we're also trying to be technology agnostic and work in an open way. We want to build on what's been built, but I would like to just sort of add an asterisk to that to say what's built is constantly changing and evolving. And as we build new things and prove new things out, we were trying hard to incorporate that into our thinking and to bring people who are working on those ideas into our community group. That's another invitation, by the way. So what I'd like to talk to, or what we would like to talk to you about now, is how we have evolved over the last year. And we've looked to do three main things. Number one, prove that it is possible to collaborate across standards bodies, across organizations, to develop the Global Assured Identity Network, or a Global Assured Identity Network, or a standard for Global Assured Identity Networks. Prove that governance is viable, and then prove that it is technically viable. So I'll talk through the first two, and then I'm going to pass it over to my partner in crime, Torsten. I'm very excited to say we're finally presenting live together after this period of time. And he'll get to talk soon. Okay, so when it comes to proving goodwill and the ability to collaborate, so we have brought together 5, asterisk maybe soon 6, organizations who are sort of the guiding, steering, conscience of the GAIN world. So we have the 5 nonprofits that have been progressing this work have been the Open Identity Exchange, which has done a great deal of work on rules, governance around digital trust frameworks. There have been, that's a typo actually, there are 49 participants in the OIX working groups looking at this work. We've also been working with the Institute of International Finance, who also published the paper, and they have been representing the voices of financial service institutions. The Cloud Signature Consortium, which looks to progress standards for electronic signatures. Torsten here is a representative of CSE. We've been working closely with the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation on standards for legal entities and following their work on LEIs and VLEIs in particular. And then, of course, I'm skipping over the Secure Identity Alliance because their membership or their participation in this group is still under discussion. But the OpenID Foundation is where we have been sort of housing the technical proof of concept. And we have 30 members in our technical proof of concept that Torsten and I co-chair along with a few others. And we would love for you to get involved. If you're here and you're representing a nonprofit group or a standards organization, the invitation is there to join this at this level and discuss joining the MOU. And if you are here representing an organization that wants to contribute to the technology and maybe implement some of the standards we're going to talk to you about today, then the proof of concept, the technical POC may be the right place for you to engage. Or if you're more interested in the policy and the governance dynamics, then the work that's happening in OIX is a great opportunity to engage too. So you're invited. I'll say that maybe a few more times. Just touching briefly on where we've been and where we're going. So this, as we launched the GAIN paper, we also had an alpha POC, which connected identity providers, sorry for the word, Dick, and RPs using OpenID Connect for identity assurance. It's funny, I'm usually the one that talks about that word, aren't I? Yeah. Yeah, we've had some discussions about it. So the Alpha POC was the first set of implementations at an IDP and RP level. And we have been building on top of that. OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance has undergone some changes, and others have been implementing that as well. We have since then, and I'm going to let Torsten speak to this more fully, been looking at how you build trust at a network level, at a network of networks level. Yeah, I'm gonna let Torsten speak to that later. At an OIX side, they've been doing the Guide to Trust frameworks and mapping across frameworks. And we are looking very much to bring in more participants from SSI communities to test different standards, and also to add third-party services and additional services on top of what we've looked at, more use cases, basically. So I'm going to speak briefly to the work that's been happening inside the Open Identity Exchange on the governance piece, and then I will pass to Torsten to talk about our proof of concept. So the big question that OIX started with was, what is the currency of identity? Is it all about trying to enable one trust framework to trust another in terms of levels of assurance, or does trust get traded at a credential level? That's the big question that they've been looking to answer. And they've been looking at interoperability within different contexts, different models. So the first example is very simple. That's one trust framework just agreeing to trust another trust framework. Very simple bilateral agreement to trust one another's ID documents or digital assertions. The second is, just making that a little bit bigger. This is we accept each other's IDs, and we do that across a larger group of frameworks. So that might be different states accepting driver's licenses, or member states in the European Union trusting one another. And then there's the concept of the interoperability framework. Is there a policy layer somewhere that enables, maybe more diverse trust networks to interpret one another, to say, okay, here's how we translate what trust means in trust network A, what it means in trust network B and C, and here is the level of trust you can have in this assertion as it crosses borders. And then the last one is, does that policy translation layer, does that happen at the wallet level? So they're looking at all of these options in the OIX. And what they're talking about really is, how do we enable that through metadata? What do we need to include in, for example, like what's the liability model from one network to another? What's the data schema? Levels of assurance, obviously. So this is ongoing work at the Open Identity Exchange. And again, if you are interested in participating, please reach out. We can put you in touch with the OIX. All right. Oh, and this is kind of another pitch for that. So like the work here is meant to benefit everyone. Who is going to achieve interoperability? Who's going to benefit from that? It's everyone from government, private sector, existing bank ID schemes, independent ID providers, and also relying parties across the ecosystem. So that was a really quick tour of some really deep work that has been happening over months at the OIX. And at the end, hopefully we have time for questions. But now I'm going to hand over to Torsten to talk about the technical POC. And I'll give him this too.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Oh, hi, Dick. So great to see you all again in person. So I'm going to talk. This is my first occurrence on the stage today. So you will see me talking with other ladies today. So this is about the GAIN proof of concept community group. This is a new kind of group that we have set up in the OpenID Foundation. This is a group that does not do standards. So we're not writing standards. We're not testing. Oh, yes, we test standards.
Well, our goal is to build a blueprint for global assured identity networks. So our goal is, for example, not to set up a single network or to do something in production. We are building a blueprint. So we want to find out what technologies need to be combined to leverage the vision of GAIN. And the proof of concept groups, or the way that we have chosen, is we set up a prototypical environment, a sandbox environment, where we're trying to connect different identity networks, real identity networks, so people can play with it, we can test it, we can test different approaches and designs. And we defined our goal that we are done if people really know what it takes to build such a network of network, and when they take it to the next level. And where we are right now is we have tested some of our hypotheses. First of all, that it is possible to build interoperability. Okay, good. Second, then we can do that across jurisdictions and with different architectures. And with different architectures is pretty important, because the idea of GAIN is to use to build on what's been built. Meaning, we do not assume to solve the global digital identity problem by rolling out a new technology and completely building a user base from scratch. To the contrary, the idea is to use what's there, different identity solutions in Sweden, in Canada, in Australia, whatsoever, to interconnect them and to allow people to use their identity, users to use their identity someplace else by increasing the reach of their existing network. And those networks use different architectures, meaning some of them are federated, some of them use decentralized identity approaches, and so on. So the ambition is to really combine them. And what we've done in the first step, that ended end of last year, we have shown that 5 different of those IDP implementations could work in an interoperable manner by using a profile of OpenID Connect for identity assurance. So we defined a very, very small, very narrow profile with a couple of claims and the mechanisms to convey metadata about the provenance, for example, and the assurance level of those claims, because that is in the end important to conduct or to execute the logic that Elizabeth was just talking about, right? Our assumption is those different networks operate under different operational rules and different trust frameworks. So we need to make sure that the recipient of the data knows more about the claims than just the value. So that's what we did. And we used the OpenID conformance test to also test those identity providers. Among them, for example, BankID from Sweden and DITSME from Italy. And what we also did is, among those were IDPs or IIPs with completely different architectures. So BankID Sweden, for example, is a single identity service that is a shared service provided by a company on behalf of the Swedish banks, right? So it's easy to put a new interface on such an IDP and connect it to relying parties. Then we've got connected the yes.com ecosystem from Germany, which is composed of more than 1,000 IDPs. So it's this large-scale federation. And last but not least, we connected DITSME, which is an Hyperledger Indy-based SSI solution. And here in this case, what we did is we transformed the claims from the credentials into standard ID tokens. So in the end, here OpenID Connect functions as a interoperability layer that has an impact on the trust model, clearly. But we were able to show that it's possible, at least, to build on that level to some extent an interoperable solution. Well, that will be the solution in the future. In a production system, I don't know. I honestly don't know. But we were able to connect those different kinds of IPs to the same sandbox. We will be also working on additional APIs that such services networks can expose. Some of them are identity related, some of them are not. For example, payments and electronic signing, because we believe that identity in the end is not enough for implementing reasonable user journeys. But this is something we will be taking on later. The decentralized SSI piece is something that we also have on our short-term plan. But what we are doing right now is we are focusing on simplicity of the RP integration. So what we want to achieve is that once we have built this network of networks, it should be able that with a single technical integration and a contextual integration, a relying party should be able to access digital identities from all the connected networks. And that means we need to somehow connect those networks, and we need to make sure that they are compatible and interoperable to an extent that the same technical integration is sufficient to get access to all the different data. We took a look, or we did a survey that took half a year, I guess, to find out what technologies, what standards are available to build a trust management infrastructure so that relying parties on a certain network can find out and determine what other networks are available and what IIPs in those other networks are available, and vice versa, because the IIPs in the other networks will also need to establish trust in the relying party. So we took a look in different approaches. If you are interested to learn more about that, we can also discuss during break or later on. I will also be around at IRW. And in the end, we decided to go with OpenID Connect Federation. Some of you might say, yeah, well, it's an OpenID Foundation activity, so it's not a surprise. Basically, in the end, we decided to go with this approach because it seemed to us the most lightweight approach, and it allows something that is really key to us. What we want to achieve is that the networks can be interconnected more or less without changing their internal structure and trust management system. So we, for example, at yes.com have our trust management infrastructure in place. So we manage access to more than 1,000 IDPs from the relying parties using our proprietary APIs and infrastructure. And we don't want to change that for obvious reasons, because it would cost a lot of money to change that. And we would also need to make our relying parties and IDPs modify their integrations, right? So the business benefit would need to be really huge to justify the investment. So we want to stick to it, and the same holds true for all other existing networks. And what we came up with is the idea that every network stays as it is, and we define an abstraction, an interface that those networks can use to exchange metadata about what IIPs and what relying parties they serve. And due to the way OpenID Connect Federation is designed, it can be used for that kind of abstraction layer. So it does not need that the networks need to really implement OpenID Connect Federation. It's used as the abstraction and data exchange layer. Let me put it that way. And on top of that trust management infrastructure, we also need to define how the relying parties and IIPs communicate with each other, because one of the underlying assumptions and the goals of GAIN is we do not want to rely on intermediaries to make that happen. If it's possible and desired, it should be possible to use the most direct path between a data recipient and a data provider. And that's why we defined and we evolved the profile that we used in the first stage based on OpenID Connect for identity assurance to allow, as far as possible, that relying parties from one network talk to a network on the other side. However, the architecture also caters for solutions where, for example, the network where the IIP resides wants to put a proxy in between the communication parties because, for example, it uses SAML or something like that. I mean, interoperability works to some extent and then a certain bandwidth, but you can't really map anything to anything, right? But the architecture allows to encapsulate those implementation details in the respective network. So we came up with some principles. I won't go into all details, but what is of utmost important from my perspective, speaking as a yes.com representative, this new network should not result in a complete change of the business strategy and the business processes of the networks. So for the networks, it is the benefit of GAIN is they can provide their relying parties with an increased reach. The same holds true for the IIPs. So generate more business. What they do not want to do is to give up their responsibility and their control or the business processes and their customers. So, and we cater for that. So we say that the local networks are still in control of the onboarding of the relying parties and the IIPs. That's their responsibility, including everything that is regarding the post-processing. The global aspect of the network should be as small as possible, just adding the benefit of having the global reach, right?
Torsten, can you expand on that to talk about public entities versus private entities? Because it could be a network controlled by a private entity, or it could be a government network.
What do you mean with expand? Yeah, I mean, such a network could be privately run, or it could be publicly run.
So they could be interoperable. It's more my point was more around what I sometimes call for governments like domestic sovereignty. They could be setting the rules of how something within their jurisdiction is defined.
So bear with me, since I'm representing a private entity, so I'm more focused on that, but you're absolutely right, yeah. It holds true for states and government institutions as well, right? They can be independent, or they stay independent of the global network. The global network just is the mediation layer to allow access to other networks.
Yeah, I think that's a particularly important point where there'll be some government representatives listening in to this conversation, that it's not just private entities or just financial services looking at transactions and use cases within their domain, but quite widely, all types of economy-wide transactions.
Absolutely. No one is being discriminated.
And it can also then be within a jurisdiction. So we had an interest, Deb Bucci and I were talking to some, senior thought leaders that work on HL7 and health interoperability. Mm-hmm. And even within like a US context, you can have tremendous heat around what data is moving between entities within US health networks, which are notoriously complex. And then you add the spanner in the works of something as complicated as post-Roe v. Wade and what information related to an abortion of an individual across state lines is moving around. And I don't see that to be polarizing in any way, shape, or form, just to say that there is a lot of complexity as well as a lot of importance to solving these problems. And it's across many different verticals, but the actual foundational work happening here is setting, robust capabilities that could be portable to a wide range of uses.
Absolutely. So quick look on the time plan, the milestones. So right now we are writing up a new version of the interoperability profile, and we are building a new version of the prototype, and we hope by end of the year, beginning next year, we will really be able to connect real networks, meaning the sandbox of Italian federations, the sandbox of Connect ID from Australia, the sandbox from yes.com and others. And so relying parties, for example, in our network can access IDPs in the sandbox, in the Australian networks. Really fascinating. And I can tell you, alone the discussions around really determining, or I should have said, negotiating the technical interoperability profile took us a month, I would say a month, and a couple of working group sessions, because what we learned is, well, everyone does OpenID Connect. All right. Some of them do FAPI. Excellent. But for example, some of them do FAPI 2 with PAR requests, but requiring signed requests as well. Right? And we do not want to put too much implementation burden on the networks, especially those that are not as agile as others. So it was quite tricky to come to that profile. If you read it, bear with us. Keep in mind, we wanted to come up with the prototype as quickly as possible. I think a future version of the profile will be a bit simpler, but right now we have that profile, we write it down, and we hope that we can demonstrate a real sandbox with the real networks pretty soon. All right. Do you want to talk about that?
We're going to have to wrap it up shortly because we're running a few minutes over now.
I think we can go straight to questions. This slide really just says that we know that there's a lot that's moved on since we launched the GAIN paper. There's a lot to take stock of, and a lot of conversations that we would like to bring into kind of a year on. Here's what we've learned, and here's what we're thinking about next. So we're gonna be updating the paper, but I will leave it at that and just open the floor to anything. I know that Kalia, you already raised your hand. I don't know if anyone else has Yes, we've got another question in the back.
Maybe I'm missing something, but the architecture you articulated basically means to get interoperability between an SSI network and an OpenID network, you're doing a kind of transitive trust. You're losing the signature. The signatures on the credentials are what you need to trust the information. And to get it, to turn it into some other token, you're having a proxy issuer, right?
You're right with respect to the POC POC. That's what I mentioned.
Yeah.
I said that. Do you want me to
Okay,
answer?
so I read it right.
Yeah.
Just checking. Okay.
With respect to the POC, in this prototype, we are only interconnecting federations. And the next step will be, or then the plan is then to really in detail look into decentralized identity, because we haven't had the time to do that right now. So I can't tell you how the solution will look like.
It's
Why
also
not
worth
just
saying.
do decentralized. You know.
Can you say that again, please? I didn't understand.
Why not just do decentralized?
Let's go back to our. Please let me just say that sentence. You remember what we said. The idea is to build on what's been built. We can at IW go through the exercise to write down the numbers, how many digital identities exist today on this planet, and what technologies they are built on. We want to connect existing digital identities.
Okay, and other people who founded IIW, if we said that at the beginning, we wouldn't even have OpenID. I think we're here, at least from the motivation. Okay, let me just say my piece and we can pass the mic on, which is the motivation for many of us was trying to figure out how the architecture empowers individuals. And the identity provider model has been amazing in some ways. And it's also puts identity providers in this extreme position of power relative to their users.
It was kind of related. I was just wondering, do you envision a truly decentralized architecture, or will there be some, and I'll use the old example of in common, where there's some metadata distribution and kind of management, or will this truly in the long run be distributed, and partners would be kind of running their own little gateways for these different solutions? I just wonder what your thought, where you're headed with that.
I can tell you what truly decentralized means. We want to get we want to be as decentralized as the current systems are. We do not impose any other further gateways, aggregators, or whatsoever. That's our design goal, right? And as I said, if people decide to set up a proxy or aggregator, fine, it's their decision. We want to support as direct as possible connections, and we have built into the architecture also the possibility that a certain network itself can take care of any incompatibilities, right? If a certain, for example, in the yes.com network, we already today support a direct connection between relying parties and IDPs. And we do want to leverage that. So we didn't want to put a proxy in front of our relying parties. That's why we decided to slightly modify our API to be OpenID Federation compatible. But in the end, for relying parties, from a relying party standpoint, we are as decentralized as previously. But there is no general solution to that, because the different architectures of different networks are so different, it's unbelievable. I hope that somehow answers your question.
Hi, Nicole Roy, Director of Technology and Strategy at InCommon. Thanks for mentioning us. I'm really, really, really excited about this, thinking about something that Heather had said earlier, and Mike Jones asked about like his PhD dissertation from CMU, and it's like, and then thinking about what Kalia said, you have all these different things that can contribute little bits and pieces of your identity. You've got all the IDPs in InCommon, you've got all the IDPs in EduGain, and then you've got fully, totally, self-sovereign identities and stuff. And I really like that you're making this open to all those things. Proxying is just a reality, I think. This is, to me, it's not one or the other. It's like all of them. And that makes me excited. So.
When you talk about network of network and FIs, I have an interior dreary and dark and dystopian. In your final product, how are you taking into account cyber warfare attacks, and how does the system, when you get to the end state, fail gracefully or from my perspective, in a privacy preserving manner? I mean, is that even part of your scope? Because if you're talking about identity between FIs, it's at some point quite likely to be war gamed out by cyber warfare experts.
From a technical standpoint, what we do is we establish a way for existing networks and solutions to exchange metadata. Clearly, they are relevant, especially to security. I would not assume they are relevant for privacy because they do not contain PII. It's more or less location data, right? But you could falsify them. That's a fact. Beyond that, the responsibility for everything that happens in a transaction lays with the data recipient and the data provider, the relying party and the IIP. What that means is everything that is in place regarding cybersecurity and privacy is just leveraged. So it doesn't have an impact on it, right? And because I hope because we are adopting an existing standard with OpenID Connect Federation that is aiming for a high security level when it comes to attestation of this kind of metadata, we can also provide a reasonable solution for cybersecurity threats in that space, in that sphere.
So with that, I think we'll have to move on to move through the fast. Okay, one last question, but we're cutting into other sessions now.
Hello, Judith Fleener, Director of Strategic Engagement for the Trust Over IP Foundation. And I just wanted to say to both what Clea said and others, we're releasing our reference architecture tonight. So it'll be available at IIW. It is draft version 1. And we want all the intelligent people in this room to be looking at it. I know that Thorsten has had many conversations with our grouping chair. And our whole goal is to have the minimum viable in our architecture to both look at what's done in OpenID Connect. We are not against that. And also move forward to what we need to have for decentralized identity. So I just wanted to say thank you, Thorsten, for the early looks and early conversations you have so that we can work together successfully.
Thank you, Judith, and congratulations. I'd just like to reiterate the call for other people to get involved, to get engaged, especially, we don't have a lot of representation from the decentralized and SSI community, and it would be wonderful to have you join us. You can contact me. You can contact Thorsten. You can contact director@oidf.org. Thank you. Okay. All right. And I apologize for that.
Thank you. Are you staying on for the next one? Yeah, I think so. So just as a little segue while we get set up for the next conversation, first of all, thank you again, everyone who's online, everyone who's in person. We welcome the conversation. We approach this top conversation modestly, hoping to have the safe spaces, to have the conversation, to thrash it out. And as I like to say, can try and point everybody north. If we can head north, then we have a chance of solving some of these structural problems. And I like how Nicole phrased it, which is, and I agree with you, Nicole, I think there's a plurality of different approaches that exist today that will continue to be out there. Governments are enabling different standards, private entities are enabling different standards, and we need to be realistic that plurality of different standards and different approaches and different trust frameworks is likely to come to pass. So, and I think we're already in it, right? So for the next 3-5 years, whatever lens you want to use, what can we do to create pragmatic solutions and work together with other nonprofit organizations to have the safe spaces, have the conversations, and flesh this out. Let's be somewhere much more successful 5-10 years from now. So on to the next one. I'm not a clicker. So this is maybe a good segue into the Open Wallet Foundation, welcoming Juliana Clark, who's working. Well, I'll let you introduce yourselves, but delighted to share a little bit on the Open Wallet Foundation. You did see in one of their earlier slides a framework around how trust frameworks might map to each other. And one of those options is to look at wallet and open standards towards wallets. And so looking forward to hearing the latest and greatest from the Open Wallet Foundation. Thank you both.
As mentioned, I'm Juliana Kapik. My first time meeting Torsten here, so very grateful to stand in front of you as well as meet him. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Open Wallet Foundation and give you a perspective on where it sits today from a status perspective, as well as some of the activities that are going on within the different groups. So we've just popped up here. We can go to the next slide, what we're going to discuss. So the big issue is, what is the purpose of the foundation? And so it has been determined that the intent is to support various open source, open data, and or other projects relating to or supporting the development of interoperable digital wallets, including infrastructure and support initiatives. The concept behind it really drives the purpose, and that it's to create an open source community that works together to blend different skill sets, to build fundamental standards-based technology. Right now, it's growing. There's a lot of interest, a lot of activity, and a lot of participation. And at this point, there are over 300 entities, from small to large, expressing interest in joining.
All right. There is tremendous interest, and also a couple of people here in the room are involved with the initiative. The challenge now is to really turn that into an open source project, an actual open source project. Because right now there is a lot of goodwill, there's intent, and now we need to figure out who is willing to contribute source code. What shall we focus on in the first kind of release? And there's been intensive discussions among the membership. And first of all, we came up with the idea that this is not going to be a single open source project. It is, in the end, an umbrella project, meaning there will be different, or there will be the possibility for different open source projects that might be related or independent. And in the end, the contributors, the people that write the source code or commit resources to the project, decide what we're going to do. Why is that important? I mean, we all are identity geeks in some way or the other, so we're quite familiar with this market. And the situation when it comes to this decentralized identity and verifiable credentials is pretty complex, right? Most people can agree, wouldn't it be great to have a single protocol, a single credential format, a single signature scheme? That's the level everyone can agree. But then, well, and I would go with, it's a bit more difficult. And we do not want to make decisions by committee, because they are not sustainable. And that's what we said. The people that are benefiting from those modules, wallet implementers, for example, organizations that want to utilize wallets, shall decide where to put their chips. But nevertheless, and at Linux Foundation, they call that duocracy. I really like that term. And nevertheless, since there are so many people involved, the topic was raised, well, can we come up with a suggestion of an initial project structure? And we talked about that. And what we did is, because this is a multidimensional problem space, we used the European Union's EIDAS version 2, the European Digital Identity Wallet, as kind of a reference point, right, to come up with initial proposals. And the European Digital Identity Wallet is supposed to be not only, even though the name would suggest that, to be an identity wallet, it shall also support, for example, payments. So the proposal right now on the table, and this is by no means set in stone, because if people do not contribute source code, it's not going to happen. We start with tokenized payment cards. We implement, or we will try to implement ISO MDL. Why is ISO MDL so important? Well, even though in the European Union, the driver's license is not used for identification purposes, but just for proving that you are allowed to drive a car, for example, the ISO MDL standard was selected as a candidate by the European Commission as the fundamental building block in the European Digital Identity Wallet. And we thought it would be a good idea to somehow align with that decision and take a look into that. Nevertheless, we would also like to provide a solution that is based on verifiable credentials, W3C verifiable credentials, because it seems to be the more general purpose kind of solution for a couple or a lot of different problems. And we also have anonymous credentials in the list as the currently very privacy preserving proposal for having verifiable credentials. As I said, there's a discussion ongoing. We are really happy that in the last week, we got the first proposal for a code contribution from Avast. Avast proposed to contribute code to the third project proposal, the W3C verifiable credential implementation that they already have. Yeah, and we hope we will see more contributions and projects being spun up around those contributions. We will be defining certain principles and requirements all those projects need to comply with, for example, from a security standpoint, privacy standpoint, interoperability standpoint. First of all, to make sure they all live up to the vision of the Open Wallet Foundation. And second, we also need to make sure that in the end, wallet publishers can build wallets that are multi-purpose in nature. Because one of the biggest problems today is that for the different use cases, typically there are completely different protocols and completely different credential formats, which are then maintained in different wallets. This is really a difficult situation, because as a user, then that means you need to download a couple of different wallets for the different use cases. And especially the European Digital Identity Wallet, which is supposed to cover e-health, payment, identification, and travel, is a candidate for that. So what we want to achieve, and we have started to draft requirements for the different modules. What we want to achieve is that the wallets can be multi-purpose. So you can use the same wallet to pay and to identify yourself. I mean, basically, it is nothing new, right? You can do that with the platform wallets today. So wallets built based on OWF code should live up to the same principles. It should be possible that with the different building blocks, so for example, ISO MDL and W3C verifiable credentials, if you have both of them in the wallet, you should be able to unlock your wallet with a consistent user experience with one login. So it should not be necessary for the different building blocks to log in twice or 3 times or something like that. And there was a requirement. The third requirement was one that really caused discussions in the last call. Whether we shall be aiming to allow and enable that credentials in different formats can be presented in the same transaction. For example, a verifier asks for an identifying credential and also for my diploma. The first is an ISO MDL, the second is a W3C verifiable credential. There's no wallet today that supports this kind of functionality. And that's really hard to implement, to achieve. But hey, perhaps this is our North Star, right, going forward. Yeah. And we will also have a discussion about, and since this is not standard, this is about code, what kind of code we're going to produce. And one of the important questions is whether we're going to use shared code across platforms, or whether we go the fully native path, right? Both of them have advantages. Cross-platform code typically promises to be cheaper in the end to be maintained, whereas platform native code, well, it integrates natively with the capabilities of the operating system and also the development tools. So from my perspective, a major driver for the decision will be the initial code contributions. So depending on whether what kind of code we have, that might be a very interesting and important data point to in the end decide where we're going to go. And Avast, for example, is going to contribute in code that is written cross-platform in Go. And with that, I would like to hand over to Jana. Oh, so shall I click?
Sure.
Okay.
Thanks, Torsten. So one of the challenging things for the OWF at this point, while they're just in formation, is to try and start to create some structure around the activities. We have a call out for code. We have looking for membership to come in and contribute code and contribute ideas and experience, standards-based expertise. But one of the big challenges we're going to have is ensuring that the output from any open wallet code meets standards, is compliant and conformant in the jurisdiction it's in or the jurisdictions it will be in. So there's a proposal here to adopt standard Linux Foundation project lifecycle to start to create some structure around that. And it'll be a really important part of the formation of the OWF. And I'd call on anyone here who would like to participate in this to start to form a really strong basis for not only assisting the code projects, but ensuring there's a proper structure around them so we can meet privacy and security requirements around the world. Dovetailed into that is we recognize that it needs to be steeped in foundations for interoperability. To achieve whole product interoperability, a very lofty goal, they have to be accepted. The wallets have to be accepted by governments and regulatory regimes around the world. And those requirements will be very, very high. And so Common Core will need to address interoperability at 4 foundational levels: legal, for governance, for credentials, systems, management of identity, all things everyone here is familiar with; business, which is the alignment of the processes and responsibilities and expectations to achieve mutually beneficial business goals. Because at the end of the day, there's going to be an adoption between consumers and businesses and governments. And so that business level of interoperability is going to be really necessary as we start to look at the output for the wallet. Then we have semantic and syntactic, and I think we just saw Torsten talk about networks and how important a role they will play in interoperability. And we need to really understand how the wallet fits into that ecosystem. And then, of course, the thing that many of the standards work on, which is the ability for different systems and devices, applications, and so on to connect in a coordinated way with very little effort from the end user. The next layer, and what I feel is the most important layer, is a participation from what are classified as associate members within the OWF. And these are nonprofit organizations like the OpenID Foundation, many others like DIAC, OIX. There's a long, long list, and I think Dawn may have that list handy. And these organizations are going to be pivotal, both in the guidance and lending experience to project members who are working on code to be able to ensure every step of the way that there is reference to the standards, reference to the framework, so that the outputs fit and align, can have an opportunity to be conformant and compliant. We think they have a really huge asset that can be tapped and provide framework awareness, international alignment and cross-sector interoperability, legal and regulatory compliance, and technical standards conformance. So as Torsten mentioned, we'll open up the floor, but our primary objective is to produce code, and contributions of code are absolutely necessary for it to move forward. But that code needs to be high quality, secure, privacy preserving, and standards based. The OWF, as it forms, is a group of interdisciplinary people and who self-organize and collaborate to build code. So as we all know, that is a challenging set of cats to herd. And so there's a lot of energy going into the different memberships and trying to create alignment and harmony within those groups so that we have an opportunity to produce successful output and hopefully narrow down to be able to produce one strong, successful output to start.
So Juliana, Torsten, I'm sorry, we are limited on time. So maybe we can just take one or two quick questions from the floor and then wrap it up there, because we're going to be helicopter through the standards part of our discussion. Sure. So please, any quick questions from the group? Yeah. One here from the front row. Torsten, if you can share your microphone with Heather.
Then I also have a chance to ask.
Tim, fire away.
Tim Gabali, Microsoft. Quick question. So you said multi-purpose wallets. Some of the work we've been doing in FIDO Alliance around invocation and selection, we've been actually taking the inverse approach of that any app can present a wallet credential. The user shouldn't have to stuff all of their credentials in one place. The Avis app, if you have an active reservation for a car, can hold an insurance credential without it being a wallet. Does OWF kind of share, like, it sounds like because it's modular and there's going to be SDKs and all this fun stuff, it would map to that. Is that accurate? Like, I don't need to be a purpose-built identity wallet. I can be an app that holds an identity credential. Like a university app could hold my current university status, for example.
Thanks, Tim, for the question. So, I mean, I was talking about the ultimate vision. So, it should be possible to build wallets that are multi-purpose, but it should also be possible to build single-purpose wallets with it, right? I mentioned the previous one because that has the more ambitious technical requirements, right? But if you have a building blocks that can cooperate within the same wallet, you can also use the same building blocks to build different wallets. Regarding your invocation, it would be very interesting to have a discussion about that. Simply because I'm assuming that having different dedicated wallets for different credentials would require kind of a discovery mechanism on the operating system level to really determine what kind of credentials live. And I think that's pretty challenging.
Yeah, I think, and we can talk later, but I mean, I think ultimately what I'm saying is, like, take away the term wallet. Does OWF as an organization believe any app that's on my phone can hold credentials, whether we call it a wallet or not? Like
I wouldn't call it believe.
Sure.
But it should be possible.
Yeah,
any app that requires, yeah, I mean, any app that wants to have credentials for whatever purpose should be able to use those modules. Yeah. Thanks for getting that straight.
Yeah, and I think I'll follow up also to say the building blocks are just that. The OWF's intent is not to build a wallet, but to create standardized, well, not to create a standard, but to standardize on core building blocks so that others can use them. And we raise the bar on security and privacy and within those core components.
Pause the questions there. I think during IIW, many of you will have a chance to learn more. use our standards, so we certainly seek to support them in that. Happy to introduce our secretary of the OpenID Foundation, Mike Jones, also working group co-chair of OpenID Connect. We're going to do all of these working group briefs are going to be out 5-6 minutes each, so we have a bit less time to do just the headlines on each working group. With the exception of the OpenID Connect for verifiable credential one, which is going to
Hello, I'm Mike Jones from Microsoft and the OpenID Foundation, and one of the 3 chairs, the other 2 are here, of the OpenID Connect working group. So a lot's been going on. As I said, I think the last time I gave this presentation, this is one of the most exciting times for the Connect working group, really in about a decade. The logout specs are final. Thank you all who provided working group last call feedback. We're finishing a bunch of stuff. The unmet authentication requirements spec that Torsten wrote is becoming final. Prompt create is becoming final. The native SSO for mobile apps is becoming an implementer's draft. We're continuing to make great progress on the OpenID for verifiable credentials work. You'll be hearing about that from others shortly. We created a landing page specifically dedicated to this work so that there's a clear place to point people to understand where are all the specs and what's the status. It has a pointer to the white paper, etc. We're continuing to make great progress on the OpenID Federation spec, which Torsten mentioned recently. I see Nicole nodding. I want to thank people like Andre Denega here, and some of the rest of you in the room who've been providing good, actionable feedback on tightening things up and clarifying it. We're already in production deployment by not 1, but 2 Italian government federations. Watch this space for further details. We're actively marching that towards final. As Gail alluded to, we submitted the pass submitter application to ISO JTC1 so that they will approve the OpenID Foundation as a submitter of publicly available specifications. That lets them republish the final OpenID Connect specifications without technical changes, such that they can be referenced by governments who want to procure against ISO standards is one of the benefits of doing that. And yes, we're continuing to make progress on whittling down the errata. We closed out 10 in the last couple weeks. We're actively finishing that. That's needed in order to do the pass submission because we don't want to submit the pass application with known errors. You know, this is the problem with doing slides in advance is you talk to people and then you learn things that you would have put on the slides. So some of the topics that I think we will talk about at IW include automatic registration, the ability to bring your own client ID. That was talked about at ITF last week and was well received. It is one of the features of OpenID Connect Federation. You know, we may do some spec work. I was talking with Dick, and Dick is interested in resurrecting the idea of having metadata about resource servers, which a long time ago, I think Phil Hunt and I wrote a spec about, which never got adopted. But, you know, maybe we bring that back. So talk to Dick at IW about why he cares. I just have one administrative question, which is I'd like for those who would normally participate, should we hold the Thursday calls or not in light of us being here? My personal take is I'm okay canceling the 7 a.m. call, but I'll leave it up to Christina, who I don't think is in the room, about whether to cancel the 8 a.m. call. So watch the mailing list. Is there anybody who has stuff they really want to do on the 7 a.m. call? For instance, some of the Federation authors aren't in the room. All right, I will message them. I am done. Thank you.
Thank you for the quick tour, Mike. Introducing our chairman, Nat Sakamura, who I think you all know, giving the FAPI working group update. Thank you, Nat.
All right, so I guess you guys are awake. So I'll do a quick report on the FAPI working group. So since last workshop in May, we have made substantial progress, such as bringing the FAPI 2.0 status. We've actually finished the formal security verification of FAPI 2.0. That took us half a year. And they've found issues, and we've applied the fixes, and that's the whole point of doing the formal verification, right? And as of today, I think we are into the 45 days public review period for FAPI 2.0, which is good, right? And I have to credit Australian Data Standard Body, DSB, for funding these works, and excellent work by University of Stuttgart. All right, and then on the Brazil side, recertification of the implementation against FAPI 1.0 has started. That's going to be a few hundred of them. SAMA, which is the Central Bank of Saudi Arabia, decided on the adoption of FAPI 1 with the transition plans to FAPI 2.0, which is good. And also last week, I just learned that Minna Bank, a Japanese bank, announced the availability of FAPI API to Money Forward, which is one of the biggest fintech. And just coming back briefly on the FAPI 2.0, so we expect to be final in 2023 spring. Okay, now what are we working in the working group? So as a work package 2, sort of, we are now diligently working on FAPI 2.0 message signing and FAPI client-initiated back-channel authentication, CBAC, and dynamic client registration. And also the security analysis, formal security verification on those things are going to be done. And after that, we are going to go with the FAPI grant management, so on and so forth. We haven't secured the financing for that yet, and co-funding is welcome. On the right-hand side, I have the list of number of the current issues. It's moving every day. Its count is as of last Saturday, so it may have already moved, but it's the kind of number of issues that we are working on. And what's in FAPI 2.0? We are utilizing PAR, push authorization requests, rich authorization requests, and grant management APIs, and all security best current practice RFC is being incorporated into it. And we have great plans. I'm not going to get into it, but grab me during the IAW if you wanted to hear about them. And there are great opportunities for becoming working group members. And we are working on the potential new use cases like account information, payment initiation, payee confirmation, and so on and so forth. And that's our standard approach, reuse as much as possible, and so on and so forth. And we also have the FAPI white papers. We've got 2 versions of it, and if you read them, you'll find loads of information. Okay, so that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Nat. Obviously, that second paper is the one that is looking at open banking, open data cross-border, which Dima Poznikov is lead editing, and many stakeholders who've been in the Monday calls, as we talked to them, an informal group has tried to look at cross-border open banking and how to enable it in practice. So we're actively looking for feedback on that paper. Please chime in with the FAPI working group if you'd like to comment on the recommendations of that paper. We'll hope to publish in November or December, the updated version. Thank you, Matt. And a quick admin update.
Yeah, to finish the last point, we have decided we're not going to have the working group calls for Connect this week.
Thank you, Matt. All right, next working group on deck, eKYC and IDA. I think, Torsten, you're going to come up and speak to this one for us.
This time is solo. Thank you. So, hello again. I'm stepping in here for Mark Hain as a co-chair of the eKYC working group. Where is the clicker? There's the clicker. So, what does the eKYC working group do? The eKYC and Identity Assurance Working Group is the...
Wait, watch your slide. Other way.
Huh?
Is that... Okay.
Yes, that was intentional. But thank you. Is working in the area of higher level identity assurance specifications, and most notably, we have been working for now, I guess, 3 or 4 years on OpenID Connect for identity assurance, and it's really fantastic to see that it's now approaching final publication. And this is based on a lot of good feedback from the community, a lot of implementation expertise across the industry, and well, that's the focus of the next weeks and months going forward. So the implementers draft 4 was reviewed successfully, and now we're going to bring that to the final review and voting. And for those of you that have never heard about OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance, that's the extension to OpenID Connect Core that allows the OpenID Connect OP to provide additional metadata about the claims in the OpenID Connect response, the ID token or the user info, which is related to, for example, the provenance, the assurance level, the evidence that were used to verify and validate the data, and so on. So it gives more context and removes ambiguities regarding all those previously mentioned factors. Beside that, the working group has also started to work on other topics, mostly as spin-offs of the OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance spec. And one of those use cases is the pending verification, which means that even though the process has been started, the final results, preparing or providing the final results will take some time. For example, in some jurisdictions, video chats are used for identifying people, right? This is really funny. You show your ID card or your passport over a video chat to an agent and do some funny things to make sure no one has falsified the picture, and then it takes some time to do the post-processing. So the data is not directly available. And that's one of the use cases that happens in the higher assurance sector. And the working group will be working on that after the core specification was made final. And there's another spinner which is called Advanced Syntax for Claims. And there are two use cases for that. The first use case is a relying party asking for a set of claims, and in the business context of that relying party, only the full set of claims makes sense, or a subset of it. For example, given name, family name, place of birth, date of birth, and address. And with standard OpenID Connect Core, the OP will try to provide as many claims as possible, but there is no way for the relying party to say, hey, if you cannot provide me all those claims, I don't want any of them. Because of privacy reasons, because I don't want to pay for an incomplete set, something like that, right? That's what happened in reality. And the one syntax for claims will allow relying parties to explicitly label and give that information to the OP. The second use case is building predicates. The canonical example is the age verification, right? And a typical example is the user over 18, right? And we discussed for a month how to solve that. One pretty pragmatic solution is to define claims is over, I don't know, 18 to 99, and to roll them out. There are specifications that do it that way. We decided to go with a predicate-based approach, and that is also part of advanced syntax for claims. So it will be possible for an OP to say, I'm supporting a predicate like age verification, and you can parameterize that, and it's built or it's calculated on top of the date of birth. Yeah. And then we've got the OpenID Connect for Authority draft, and this is an extension to OpenID Connect that allows to express relationships between users and, for example, companies, right? Am I a director of a certain company, something like that, which is very important in business use cases. And we in all those cases decided to split that up to make a dedicated draft to be able to really focus on the OpenID Connect for identity assurance spec first, and then tackle those problems later on. There are a couple of opportunities. As said, OpenID Connect for identity assurance has pretty good adoption in the market. There are a couple of implementations worldwide, and also the new drafts, the advanced syntax for claim and authority, have gained some interest. Here's one project by OSCD, for example, that we are looking into. And the working group will be also looking into how OpenID Connect for identity assurance can be implemented based on the security events framework, and how to support implementers in use and implementation of the final specification of the OpenID Connect for identity assurance specification. Well, as I said, those are mark slides. I don't know whether we will do that on in the next couple of days, but if anyone is interested to learn more about OpenID Connect for identity assurance and the additional drafts, just talk to me and we can run a session about this. And with that, I'm done with the update and happy to take questions.
Thank you. Probably a little short on time to try and do questions after each of the working groups, so we'll direct people to you offline, Torsten, or at IIW. So thank you very much for the quick view. And next up, Tim Kapali talking about shared signals and no longer shared signals in events. Oh,
so yeah, you see the hint at the cross out. I'll talk about that in a second. That is actually the biggest change, and this is more of just an FYI, and everyone's probably rolling their eyes that this is like the 19th name change. So when we first renamed the risk core specification to shared signals and events, the only conflict at the time was server sent events, which if you're not familiar is a server to client notification framework in the browser. Like there's probably not going to be a lot of overlap with that for a server to server security event framework. So we still stuck with SSE. Guess what? Gartner decided to use the SSE term, and now that's all you see on a Google search. We've been buried to page 19. So we've always tried to emphasize it's shared signals anyway. Like it's the events is too generic, right? Security signals, they're descriptive, not prescriptive. So we landed on we're going to rename to shared signals framework, which is funny because it was already shared signals and events framework, just dropping the E and dropping the N. So we'll be SSF. We have to formally actually go through and do all of that. We need to do it in a way, obviously, we don't want people to have to re-sign IPR agreements. So it may be that the specs change names, but we may leave the working group until the next round of we'll have to figure all that out. But we just decided formally across the working group the other day. So now what is the shared signals and events core framework specification, which is like the core spec, is now just shared signals framework specification. And I remember Mike's face when I told him we were changing the name again. It was hilarious again. Some new participation, which has been great. This is a fairly small working group, so anytime we get a few more people participating, organizations, that's really awesome. So Workday, Easy Dynamics, Strata, Uber Ether, and Appgate. Really awesome. All these folks have been super engaged, so we're really happy to see that. Some things that have happened on the industry side. Few webinars and workshops. So the Identity Defined Security Alliance did a webinar, and I think it was Atul and Mike hosted that, and there was someone else, and I forgot who was the third. That's that. Yes, and that went well from what I heard. So there's the QR code. They did record it, which is awesome. We also did a workshop with MITRE last week. I unfortunately couldn't join, but and that was very well received. The big one for us has been the CISA engagement. So the OpenID Foundation, the working group, has been directly engaging with CISA on Zero Trust, but also a lot of the member organizations. This has spurred additional, what's that? So you're going to kill me on the acronym. What is it? Cyber Infrastructure Security. It's a federal organization. I don't think I've ever been asked to expand it. It's always just been CISA. So yeah, Bob Lord. That's who can do that. There. So that's been awesome, and a lot of member organizations that are part of this discussion are also having their own engagements with CISA, which is really awesome. It's specific to the Zero Trust initiative they're working on. So that's exciting. That's ongoing. We'll probably have a lot more to share next time on that. That was in there twice by accident. The current working group issues we're looking at specifically around kind of major changes to the core spec are the first two. We're looking at using registries more in the spec. Right now, if you're not familiar with how the specs are laid out, there's the core spec, which talks about delivery and transport and subscription management. That's all the kind of the meat of the protocol. But then you have two sub-specs, which are really just dictionaries, right? They're event definitions. And we're trying to weigh whether those really should be specs that go through this entire spec process, or they should just be registries that we can list with IANA with certain event definitions. So we are taking kind of parts of the core spec and building a registry model similar to what Connect has, and we'll keep evaluating the other events, the event definitions as well. We've been working on stream IDs. So if you've been following this work, originally there was one relationship between the transmitter and the receiver, and you could only have like essentially one tunnel of events, right? They all shared the same context. We needed the ability to actually allow a receiver to register multiple streams with the transmitter to say, let's say, I want all of these events for this topic or this subject to come over stream 1 and these other ones to come over stream 2. That could be for different parts of the organization, but they all come in via one central endpoint. It could be data privacy, right? It could have different regions. So we felt the need, we really needed to make the ability to say each of these streams has an ID and the events and subscription is managed based off that ID. So that's a pretty major change to the spec. So we're taking our time on getting that right. Adoption remains a bit of an issue. That is something we're really trying to address. We are seeing more interest, but getting past the interest curve and actually to the deployment curve has been challenging. So that remains most of our discussions on a bi-weekly basis. In terms of opportunities, we are collaborating now with the SCIM working group who would like to use SSE for some of the SCIM operational events as part of 2.0. Continued collaboration with CISA, as I mentioned. I see that becoming more frequent. We've had a ton of engagement in multiple venues. We really want to get reference implementations going. This is obviously the challenge. I think every working group here has had this issue. Having some kind of public reference implementation that a developer can test against, which leads into developer resources, right? That vicious cycle. We really need some help. So if you have folks in your organization who are interested in this topic and could lend some DevX people, we'd certainly appreciate it. The last one we're spending a lot of time on is large SaaS evangelization, right? If we can get the Microsofts, the Salesforces, and these big organizations that have the most to gain from this to actually start implementing this stuff, it would really help. And we think there's some new use cases like around third-party cookie deprecation. We've talked about, is that an option for session revocation? There's some kind of new problems that SSE could potentially solve, and we're hoping to kind of get the right people in the discussion to have to see if that could solve their issues. No questions, right?
And that's it.
Well, we don't have anything planned for IAW. We're going to be around, but we don't have any dedicated sessions, but happy to talk.
Hey, thank you so much, Tim. And you talked about, obviously, the new members, but clearly Microsoft and AWS and Google and Cisco have been really actively involved for a couple of years now trying to build the foundations. Yep. But I think the expansion, the adoption is critical path, right? And we're getting the ask from CISA, can we move the industry more? Right? Can we get the SaaS players in? What's it going to take? What else do we need to build as components that can be consumed more easily by key players. So it's not a huge hurdle, especially in a constricted environment, recessionary environment that we're in now. Like, what can we do to make it easier for them to get in? So any of your thoughts and perspective on how to do that is welcome. But I think the federal government, as well as I think ourselves, are worried that people are getting inside the house. We're trying to secure it. We're trying to do the identity to get in the front door, but invariably people will get in, and it's work like this that's going to detect them once they get in the door. Super important, but nowhere near where we need to get it.
Yeah, and once we can get organizations like CISA on board, they can start to feel comfortable talking about it and evangelizing it. So that's kind of been the priority as of late. So
yeah, thank you, Tim. Thank you very much. And Bjorn coming up to talk about the latest on Moderna. Thank you so much, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Okay, so I am the co-chair. The other co-chair is John Bradley, who conveniently left the room. Conveniently. Moderna Working Group is a fairly mature working group, and people that have been around for a while probably have seen all this, so I will skip through a few of the slides. Again, the purpose of the group initially was to support a work by GSMA for mobile network operators to be identity providers. The group has continued to evolve to work on, besides those profiles, also additional work, extensions to Mobile Connect. Probably the most famous one is CIBA, but I'll cover that as part of the working group updates. So again, several companies has contributed to this work through the years. I choose to include all of them just to give them credit for their work. Again, so what is the working group working on? So we have one publication that is in this final, the CIBA core, and there are a couple of profiles of CIBA, one in FAPI, one in Moderna. We have a few in implementers draft, and then we have 3 that are in draft form that we're working on moving to implementers draft. The CIBA profile is dependent on the discovery profile, so we're moving both of them together forward. The registration profile is, we're trying to align that with some of the work that FAPI is doing on the DCR that Nat was mentioning during his FAPI presentation. We have some additional use cases for CIBA that has added some new issues to CIBA. One came from EKYC IDA working group for utilizing CIBA in their use case. And we also have an issue that we termed as being a part of an errata to the specification. Besides that, the working group is involved in a set of different outreaches. Obviously, the most prominent is the one with GSMA. And so besides Mobile Connect, there are multiple of applications or specifications where they utilize OpenID Connect for either user interaction or for terms and conditions that we're engaging with GSMA to ensure that they use the specification properly, and if there's any other support we can provide to them. The other engagement that we have is with what's termed as the Third Generation Partnership Project. And so that is a partnership among 5 different SDOs globally. And what is anything from 3G to 5G networks are based on the output from this organization. And they have also utilized the OpenID Connect as part of a profile for vertical applications. So there's some engagement with 3GPP in terms of any enhancement to that profile. Though within 3GPP or any telecom environment, there is a general confusion about what is a subscriber and what's a user. In most cases, they assume a subscriber, which may not be the person actually holding the phone. So there's a concept of identity management. And so there are use cases where you actually need to identify the person holding the phone rather than who owns the subscription. And it's true for all enterprise use cases where the enterprise may own the subscription, but that may not be the person holding the phone. And so as mentioned by Gail, we have a liaison now with ETSI, the European Telecom Standards Organization. The initial focus is on some of the SIOP work in the Connect working group, but ETSI is also involved in some work related to both 3GPP as well as mobile network operators that touches on identity management. And the working group is going to utilize this relationship to bring the knowledge of the foundation into the ETSI. And that was pretty quick. Done.
Very good. Thank you for getting through them. Thank you very much, Bjorn. Appreciate it. All right. Last but not least, we have, call it 10-15 minutes for OpenID Connect for verifiable credentials, latest and greatest there. A little bit more time because there's a lot moving. The specs. Here's the clicker.
Is there only one mic?
We can get you two. We can get you two. And we're going to try and keep 10 minutes to the end. So keep an eye on the clock to leave 10 minutes if you can. Mike, a second mic. Yeah, we'll get you one.
Hello. So here's an update on OpenID for verifiable credentials work we've been doing. And we have some really cool updates about the interoperability event we had this morning, which was really successful. So first things first, we're calling the set of these three specifications OpenID for verifiable credentials spec family. So essentially, this work extends OAuth 2.0 to support credentials where issuance of a collection of user claims is independent from the presentation, right? So whereas in usual OpenID Connect, the user is redirected through the browser. Usually here, the user is in between using the software, usually called wallet. So we have one spec for the issuance and then two specs for the presentation. And most important updates, it says renaming. So I think before we referred to it as OpenID Connect for SSI, and now it's called OpenID for verifiable credentials, but there's much more to it behind the scenes, right? So as I said, it's mainly based on OAuth 2.0. So ID token is not a requirement in OpenID for credential issuance and presentation, right? But we're still calling it OpenID because the specification is about user claims, mainly. And then we say verifiable credentials, we do not only mean W3C verifiable credentials. It's a more generic definition for these credentials that can be, where issuance can be independent from presentation, right? So the big strengths of these protocols are that they are credential format agnostic. They can be used with JOTs, with linked data proofs, with ISO MDocs, with anon creds, whatnot, right? So please be careful. Please do not refer to this work as OIDC or SSI. We're pretty deliberately calling it OpenID for verifiable credentials, yeah? So do you want to speak to positioning real quick? No? Okay.
You covered it pretty well.
Okay. So this is, yes. We're trying to be cool. I love it. Yeah, we'll seriously consider it. That's
Can you do a PR, please?
Yeah, before we go to the implementers draft, we need it. It's your last chance to get it in. Yeah, and thanks to Torsten and Daniel Fatt, we have a comprehensive security threat analysis completed. We didn't find anything terrible, anything like big security flaws. Daniel Fatt is doing a PR right now, so that's really good. And we have been working with Joseph Heenan. He has the first version of conformance testing for the issuance spec, which I've tested. I sat down with Joseph last week at ITF. And so it's a really good development. And we'll talk to it, but there are 9 issuers, 8 wallets implementing who do need this conformance testing. So really good development. Oh, I think I broke the clicker when I dropped it. Did I drop it?
I don't know.
It's okay, I'll help you. Go ahead.
Well, so one note so on the renaming. So I gave a presentation, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, where I said that in the end, what we do here is a new protocol, a family of protocols that is native for decentralized identity applications. It's very important to bear in mind. I mean, we started this thing as an OpenID Connect variant, but over time it evolved pretty quickly with the tremendous feedback we got from implementers. And so that now it is really something different, right? You can combine it with OpenID Connect, but you do not need two. So we've got 2 specifications that I'm going to talk about in detail and how it evolved. We very much focused in the last couple of months on OpenID for verifiable credential issuance, which is the part of the protocol family that is about issuance of verifiable credentials of any kind. As Christina mentioned, the protocol is format agnostic, meaning we are aiming at allowing, for example, the issuance of different kinds of credentials. Why is that important? That is important. Why? As I mentioned in one of the previous sessions, the market is crazy right now, right? So we have done a credential format survey. We started that at the last IW. And the last time I counted, we had 16 different credential formats. And I guess there are more that I'm not aware of. But that's true. Well, we included X509 because you wanted it, and that was a wise decision. So if you're aware of any other format, please let me know. And we think that it will take time to settle, right, this market. And we wanted to at least provide a tool in the market to have some interoperability on the protocol layer. Because previous attempts typically were tied to certain credential formats, and they are right now, right? Several specifications are tied to a certain credential format, which means you've got a vertical integration, meaning you take one piece and you have to buy the rest of it. Can you please stop that?
Oh.
Do I bore you or?
I'm a Windows user. I have Mac in front of me.
Okay. Please stand back. All right. So we want to provide this level of interoperability on the protocol level and support verifiable credentials of different kinds as good as possible. And I will come back to that. So what we did is, since the last IRW, we added a new kind of flow, which also involved the definition of a new grant type, right? A new OAuth grant type that allows a certain kind of issuance flow, where the flow starts more or less and everything is ready and set before the credential issuer and the authorization server even is involved. And interestingly, in the JFF Plugfest that a couple of us attended in the morning, all implementations used the pre-authorized code flow. Some of them also support the authorization code flow, which is great because it allows inline issuance within the wallet. But we believe that with those flow, we really have a good coverage on what is required in the market. We changed the base protocol to OAuth 2 because people said, well, I just want to issue credentials. Why do you want me to force me to issue an ID token? And well, that's correct. I mean, since this is OAuth, you can combine it. You can add it to any kind of OpenID Connect implementation, but you don't have to. And what we learned is a lot of people that build new decentralized identity applications really like the protocol because of the simplicity. So as one of the people at JFF Plugfest told me today, it's so simple. It's just an HTTP request going back and forth, and you've got my credential. Yeah, sure. That's the point, right? What we have been working on very hard in the last couple of months is the credential type identification. It's really a mess. If you take a look onto the different formats, the way a credential type is identified is different for each and every of those credential formats. In WCC verified credentials, you've got a type array, potentially in combination with a context. In ISO MDL, you've got a single doc type. In other credential formats like Anocrats, you've got a credential schema, DID, for example. So it's pretty different. But since we want to come up with a as native as possible developer experience, we want to really cater for those differences. And it took us quite a while and very intensive and heated discussions in the working group, but finally we nailed it. So we did a huge PR, and what we have right now is you can see on the right-hand side. So we've got a designator for the format in the payload of most of all the requests. And depending on the format, you can really use structures that are purposely designed for a certain credential type, which we believe results in a pretty good developer experience. We added issuer and credential metadata, which means the wallet can determine what the issuer can, what kind of credential an issuer can provide, and what these prerequisites are. What kind of credential, what kind of key type is required, what kind of attestation is required, and binding. That all can be published. And we are right now working on even improving the issue of metadata management even further. We also have added a new endpoint for get batch credential issuance, meaning you can utilize your access token to ask for, I don't know, 10 credentials if you like and if you need. For example, 2 or 3 different, or the same credential in different formats might be a use case. So we support that use case now. And we also made sure that the protocol can be used for issuing credentials on a substantial and high security level. In the end, the additions to the specification weren't that big, but we went to different use cases. We also have sequence diagrams now in the Bitbucket repository, and we worked, for example, with experts in the EIDAS context to challenge our protocol against their requirements, right? And we can now say that you can do with the protocol really issue credentials that are bound to, for example, hardware-backed keys, and the issuer can really determine what's going on there. On the presentation side, yeah, we changed that to OAuth 2 as well, which also meant no ID token required any longer. And we also had to change the protocol for that reason, because previously we had used the claims parameter to request verify presentations for credentials, and we replaced that by 2 different means to request credentials. First, we just have a parameter that contains the presentation definition. For those that are not familiar with the protocol yet, we use Presentation Exchange version 2 as language for requesting credentials. And now we just put literally the presentation definition into that request parameter. Deployments can also define their own scope values completely free, or they can freely define those and resolve them to a certain request. So if you're defining a profile, and you know what credentials are being exchanged in your profile, you can define scope values in the same way as we use scope values as designator for default claim sets in OpenID Connect Core. And we started to move pieces from the SIOP v2 spec into the OpenID for VP spec, simply because we want to make the presentation spec self-contained. So far, there are dependencies between those specs, which for some implementers establishes the perception they need to implement SIOP in order to be able to implement VP, but that's not the case. And most implementers are primarily interested in OpenID for VPs. So we want to make their life as easy as possible.
Yeah, so just quickly to add, to pay due respect to SIOP, I think we mentioned the last present workshop, but SIOP v2 in its core has been boiled down to subject signed ID token. So it's not about presenting verifiable credentials. It's about if as a relying party, as a client, you want to allow to authenticate the user using the identifiers the user brings, that's where SIOP comes in, right? So technically, you could combine, let's say, the BOSAN with OpenID for verifiable presentations. You request user to present VP using OpenID for VP protocol and use the BOSAN to authenticate, right? And also, I wanted to also double click on the cross-device flow that Torsten had in the previous slide in the bottom, because it has caused some confusion with existing experts like George, Brian, Joseph. So cross-device flow is where the response from the wallet to the verifier is HTTP post request. It's not a browser redirect, right? And we added a lot of clarifications in the spec text to make it clear that it is a new response mode. It is, that it's new. So yeah, just to highlight that. And that has been pretty useful and well received. So yeah, as our standard bodies government activities, just the first one. So we have a liaison between OpenID Foundation and ISO GTC SC17 Working Group 4 and Working Group 7, where the specs such as 18013 Part 7, which is mobile driving license over the internet work has been conducted, and also Working Group 4, where 260 Parts 3 and 4 for issues and presentation of MDocs for not just mobile driving license, but more general government issued credentials have been conducted, and we have been actively working with those communities to enable leveraging OpenID for VC protocol there. And those are still drafts, but at least in the draft stage, we do have OpenID for VC mentioned. So that has been big progress.
Yeah, and we also have been working with other bodies, standards bodies, government activities and projects. One of them is the European Blockchain Service Infrastructure. This is a European project that provides a infrastructure for blockchain infrastructure, and on top of that, a framework for decentralized identities. They have adopted OpenID for VCs as their APIs, and we also have been contributing or working with people in the eIDAS version 2 context. We were invited to present to the so-called expert group. So this is the group of the 27 member states that works on what is called the toolbox and the architecture reference framework. So are they really defining a lot of the rails that will be the technical underpinning of the eIDAS. And OpenID for VCs was also added to their shortlist of potential protocol candidates, which also includes SAML, Mike. Yeah.
FIDO.
So we have to compete with the old man, right? Björn already mentioned, we have established a liaison with ETSI, which is really exciting and fantastic, because ETSI traditionally is the standardization body that does the technical standards for all kinds of European Union's regulations. And we already have started with concrete work with the editor of the wallet interface for ETSI, and are working on contributing our protocols or specifications to upcoming ETSI standards.
2-minute warning.
Say it again. 2 minutes. Okay. Okay. So that means I won't read all the implementers. So what is really fascinating? I mean, I have been writing specifications for 12 years now, and I really have to say that this set of specification was so quickly absorbed by the market. It's really amazing, right? We have a lot of implementers, and it's even missing, I think, 5 implementers that I learned of this morning in the context of the GFF Plugfest. So as Christina already mentioned, there were 9 issuers and 8 wallets, right? That implemented OpenID for VC. So it's really it's tremendous, and it's really cool because we are getting substantial feedback from different edges of the market. We're trying to incorporate that into the protocol and make the protocol better.
Yeah, and Tobias and Oliver, the implementers, are in the room. So if anyone's curious about specific implementation experience, I would encourage you to talk to them.
Raise your hand, please.
Yep. Usual
Thank you.
suspects.
Okay, what do we need to do? I mean, there's a lot to do. We need more implementer feedback. So if you feel this is interesting for you or we already have implemented it, please let us know, right? Whether you have good experience, bad experience, please let us know. We want to solve any problems that you run into. We will be writing an overall trust model and security considerations draft. Christina already mentioned Daniel working on an overall security analysis to make sure we get everything airtight. That will most likely result in PRs to the different specifications. So the security considerations will be probably in place, but we believe that documenting the trust model and how we assume the data flow and how the trust is established is very important, because there are dependencies on the presentation, because we made the presentation as simple as possible, which means the heavy security lift is happening on the issuance side. And you need to know that if you implement that. As I said, we are working on issuer metadata, topics like decoupling of the authorization server on the resource server so that you can have multiple APIs for credential issuance protected by the same AS, for example, and all that stuff. Issuer identification by DIDs, because DIDs are used in that space, and also how we're going to manage clients. So we already in the JFF run into the problem that or the requirement and the desire that some wallet providers or issuers did not want to do client authentication or identification. And we found that in at least one use case, it's okay from a security standpoint. We also believe that we need to come up with a solution that makes it easy for larger ecosystem to manage the trust. So anonymous access isn't a silver bullet, because in the end, especially in higher assurance setups, there will be the need to really establish trust, to know who you're going to talk to, because you need to check, for example, that this is a certified wallet or a certified issuer in a certain trust framework. We will be working on that. Christina has run a session on that topic also at the ITF meeting last week, and that's going to be a big topic. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, 2 points. So now we have a dedicated page to this work under OpenID Foundation's website. The URL is pretty simple: openid.net/OpenID4VC. It's not on the slide. Yeah.
It's not on the slide?
It's not, because it's not updated. Oh. Yeah, so just giving you a heads up. We were just tired sending emails to everyone when they ask. So we just wanted the URL, we wanted to point to, right? So one big thing. And second big thing, my ambition is to. Oh, you're not.
No, we didn't mention the proximity support. So we think online is super cool, but credentials need to be usable everywhere. So we are working on proximity-based presentation of credentials, and we started with Bluetooth Low Energy with the support of the guys from MOSIP. And we're also going to enhance the cross-device flow and do even more conformance testing. Back to you.
Yeah, so expect emails from the working group asking for OpenID Foundation wide review. The goal is to take 3 specification to the next level of implementers draft, meaning first implementers draft for the issuance spec. We are pretty ready. Not pretty ready, we are ready. And same for OpenID for VP and SIOPs, taking them to second implementers draft. So heads up that is coming, ideally by the end of this year, as soon as possible.
Do we have time for questions? Okay, who's going to be the one?
IIW is going to be the two-way conversation again. So please, Mike.
I'm going to make an observation, which is I'm really encouraged by the level of developer interest and interoperation that's happening. The last time I saw that was about 12 years ago. And it's when people like Nov Mataki and the rest came out of the woodwork and built OpenID Connect and sat at tables at IIW and did interop testing. And it got better. And you're in the same virtuous cycle. So congratulations.
Yeah, we're also planning to do a demo table at IIW showing OpenID for VP interoperability. Again, I think it's 6 companies coming together where you can use multiple wallets, use multiple verifiers. No, literally when on my device, it was a verifiable credential issued by one company in my wallet by another company, presented to a third company. It was pretty fabulous. So I would encourage you guys to come see that.
All right. So you're free. And you don't have to see Torsten again, at least today. So thank you for that power run through from all the working group chairs, and really thanks to all of the presenters today. I'm taking the privilege of asking you all 2 questions. The first one is, what are we missing? Right, this is the thing I feel like is always kind of keeping me up at night. And we'll go into the board meeting swiftly after we convene this session, and then we'll have a series of strategic task force work on our 2023 planning. But I'm always worried about what we're missing, right? Are we missing some interface? We talked about supply chain during one of the breaks. Are we missing supply chain? Are we missing, entire verticals we need to be more involved with? Are there new movements on the identity landscape? In conversations with FinCEN, they're deeply troubled by, obviously, the crypto markets, crypto wallets, blockchain. That whole sphere is problematic. I don't think we're going to solve FTX's situation from last week. But is there more that we need to be doing? So that's my first question. Any thoughts from the floor? Are we missing something big? Anything obvious you haven't heard today? And if I don't hear anything, please, of course, director@oidf.org, please do ping us and let us know if we're missing something important, because it's often hard to lift yourselves up into the rafters, away from the protocols, away from the task at hand and the private organization or government need you might have day to day to think about the big moving pieces. So any suggestions from the floor, any observations? Crickets. All right, well, that's good. So that means we can't be too far off the mark, but please let us know over the next 2 months. We will be working on our 2023 planning. If we do need to be thinking about a white paper on a new area, my favorite tool of the moment, we want to know that we're putting the right investment, the right thinking into tackling new issues. My other question, and this is more playful, and thanks to a comment from Nat offline, but something I've been thinking about, is it's kind of hard not to see Twitter right now, or frankly see the headline of any newspaper that doesn't have something about Twitter and blue check marks. So if Elon Musk was sitting over here, what would you all be saying to him that he should be doing to take advantage of what's already out there? These types of standards, these kinds of capabilities, we all know that there's existing IDMV solutions he can consume, but they are a global organization that needs to do IDMV for individuals and also entities, and they're doing it out in the Twitter sphere as we speak. So any comments from the floor, any things that you might say, maybe with your personal hat on, not your organization's hat? Any suggestions from Mr. Musk? Sorry? Make it public again. So aside from it going public again, which I guess isn't going to happen this week. So we, feel free to mull that one over and let your, any board member representative you'd like know if you have any thoughts. Because I think one thing to throw around is that we, as a open standards body, a trusted stakeholder in the wider community, we can send messages, right? We can send a message to Elon Musk and say, consider doing X, Y, and Z. But what are we going to say to him, right? What is the ask? What's the suggestion? What's the recommendation? We've done the same with Apple in the past, when they implemented OpenID Connect and didn't do it quite the way that we would have recommended it. And they did, in fact, remediate some of those changes. So we can be bold. And I encourage us to think boldly and use the OpenID Foundation as, again, that safe space to get messages to the right people. That's also true for the multilateral organizations. We've heard a few things around the OECD, the UN, the World Health Organization. We have, again, a platform to communicate directly to them. So we're no longer this little Adenorati community that's very insular and so forth. We really need to be thinking about what the global community needs of us and meeting that movement, not just the OpenID Foundation, but really working in close partnership with all of the other nonprofits who are trying to move the needle as well. Any parting recommendations, asks, thoughts from the group? Hearing none at 4:02, you're free from class. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you want to talk amongst yourselves, please do go into the foyer because we'll have to use this room for the board meeting right away.